Chapter 34. If it was anyone else, it would be excusable if they didn't react in time. However, Yi Guchen had the keen senses of sword demon. He could detect the sound of a sword slicing through the void no matter how well it was hidden. However, Yi Guchen didn't turn around. Instead, he slowly tightened his grip on the flying guillotine. Swoosh! The sword that came from behind dissipated like smoke when it came into contact with Yi Guchen. In front of Yi Guchen, a black sword was being held by a black-clothed man as he charged at Yi Guchen. Interesting. The sneak attack from behind was just an illusion. If it was an ordinary person, they might have been deceived. Yi Guchen's eyes were filled with interest. The sword attack from behind seemed both real and fake at the same time. However, Yi Guchen felt that the sword attack was just a formality without any substance. The real killing intent was right in front of him. Now that Yi Guchen was alone, Yi Guchen could unleash his full strength without restraint. Yi Guchen swung his sword. The sword chi was like an aurora. It was the Aurora Flash Sword's ultimate move, Aurora's Passing. However, in the face of Yi Guchen's fast sword attack, the black-clothed man took a step forward. His figure quietly dissipated like a sword shadow and hid in the darkness. He actually combined a sword technique with a movement technique. Interesting. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. He had long sensed that the black-clothed man's sword technique was similar to the Blood Tower's shadow sword technique. However, it was obvious that the black-clothed man's sword technique was more profound than the shadow sword technique. This was because he had already combined a sword technique with a movement technique. In other words, the sword technique and movement technique were originally one. The shadow sword technique is a Xiantian sword technique that many assassins in Blood Tower practice. The sword technique in front of me must be a more advanced version of the shadow sword technique. In other words, the shadow sword technique is a simplified version of the sword technique in front of me. Yi Guchen was even more curious. The shadow sword technique was already a Xiantian sword technique. Only spirit-level sword techniques were of a higher level. Opportunity. Yi Guchen was certain that the swordsmanship displayed by the black-clothed man in front of him was the opportunity of this level. However, it was clear that in order to obtain this opportunity, he had to defeat the black-clothed man. Without hesitation, Yi Guchen changed his sword spell and performed the piercing moon sword art. However, in Yi Guchen's hands, even the most ordinary swordsmanship had a hint of returning to simplicity. Clang! 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 As the two clashed, sparks flickered in the void. Yi Guchen poured his profound qi into the blood guillotine. The blood-red blade of the blood guillotine emitted layers of bloodthirsty light. The ultimate move of the piercing moon sword technique, Moonfall. In an instant, it was as if a blood-red crescent moon had appeared. That beautiful blood-red sword light swept towards the black-clothed man. It didn't look fast, but it arrived in front of the black-robed man in an instant. The black-clothed man waved his sword. Dark sword shadows spread out, as if there were thousands of dark sword shadows surging in the darkness. However, those sword shadows were easily destroyed by the blood-red crescent moon. Yi Guchen wanted to end the battle quickly. He swung his sword again. The sword edge resonated with the void, and circles of invisible ripples spread out. In just a few breaths, 20 layers of transparent void sword wave swept out like waves. Vacuum sword wave, overlapping waves. Yi Guchen's sword edge vibrated. The 20 layers of sword wave seemed to resonate with each other. They overlapped and fell on the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man was almost unable to resist, and his body was annihilated in an instant. Looking at the black-clothed man who had completely disappeared without leaving a trace, Yi Guchen frowned slightly. However, not long after, a black stone tablet suddenly appeared at the end of Yi Guchen's line of sight. Yi Guchen walked closer to take a look, and found that a swordsmanship was indeed recorded on the stone tablet. Shadow Kill Swordsmanship. It was a swordsmanship of the middle class of spiritual level. However, with its ghostly body movement, it might be comparable to a swordsmanship of the upper class of spiritual level. Now Yi Guchen had the highest level of swordsmanship, except for the swordsmanship he had learned in his previous life, the Boundless Heaven sword art, which was a sword technique of the highest class of spiritual level. It could be said that any swordsmanship of the spiritual level was extremely rare. Even the super aristocratic families would regard it as a core martial art inheritance and would not teach it to non-core disciples. Sure enough, the shadow swordsmanship is derived from the shadow kill swordsmanship. The shadow kill swordsmanship is not only a swordsmanship, but also a body movement called shadow step. Moreover, when practiced to a high level, one can create a doppelganger. It could be said that the shadow kill swordsmanship was absolutely an excellent swordsmanship for assassination. If Yi Guqin mastered it, it would not be difficult for him to kill a grandmaster in the qi refining realm with one move. After that, Yi Guqin completely memorized the shadow kill swordsmanship. With the shadow swordsmanship, Yi Guqin believed that he would be able to practice it faster than the boundless heaven sword art. After obtaining the shadow kill swordsmanship, Yi Guqin left this level. After going through level after level of tests, Yi Guqin's strength was steadily improving, especially the shadow kill swordsmanship. Because of the foundation, Yi Guqin was able to practice it very quickly and had already reached the beginner level. For a swordsmanship of the spiritual level, it was extremely fast to reach the beginner level so quickly. On the 6th level of the 18 blood prison, after arriving here, Yi Guqin looked around and found some figures. In the first few levels, Yi Guqin had passed through alone. However, after looking around, Yi Guqin found that there were very few assassins who could reach this level. Including red-haired Ghost and Nightingale, there were only a dozen people. It should be known that there were 50 assassins who had entered the 18 blood prison this time. This was only the 6th level, and more than half of them had already been eliminated. Moreover, Yi Guqin knew that each level of the 18 blood prison was more difficult than the previous. The higher the level, the more difficult it would be. This was also the reason why only the bloodthirsty tower master had passed through the 18 blood prison. At this level, the entire space presented a desolate and bleak land. Yi Guqin was surprised to find that he could not use his profound qi. He looked sideways and found that red-haired Ghost and the others did not have the slightest fluctuation of genuine qi. Is this level limiting one's strength? Yi Guqin thought to himself. If that was the case, then what they competed with was their martial arts attainments and physical strength. Roar! Suddenly, a beast roar came from not far away, and a pitch-black demon wolf rushed over. Next, a blue-eyed cloud beast also rushed over. Three-eyed demon snake, purple lightning condor. A large number of demonic beasts surrounded Yi Guqin and the other assassins, although they were all rank 1 and rank 2 demonic beasts. Normally, with their cultivation, it would be easy to deal with these demonic beasts, but now they could not use their genuine qi and profound qi, so their strength was naturally greatly reduced. Roar! A demonic cloud python rushed at Yi Guqin. It was a rank 2 demonic beast. Under normal circumstances, Yi Guqin could have easily killed him, but now, he could still do it. Chapter 35. Boom! Yi Guqin ignited his qi and blood, and his body was covered with a layer of blood-red flame. Although he could not use his genuine qi and profound qi here, he could still use his physical strength and qi and blood. It could be said that Yi Guqin's strength was comparable to the qi refining realm, not because of his cultivation realm, but because of his swordsmanship and physical strength. With the double refinement of the muscle-bone strengthening scripture and 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra, Yi Guqin could rival a qi-refining grandmaster, with just his strong physical strength and superb swordsmanship, without using his profound qi. He held the flying guillotine in his hand, and poured his vigorous qi and blood into it. The flying guillotine's blade emitted a sharp blood-red glow. Yi Guqin swung his sword at the fiendish python with cloud stripe. The fiendish python's head was split into 2 halves. Blood, flesh, and organs splattered all over the sky. After limiting the use of his profound qi, Yi Guqin's strength did not decrease much. On the other hand, the rest of the assassins were greatly affected. Even Nightingale was forced to retreat by a few demonic beasts. Only the red-haired ghost caught Yi Guqin's attention. The red-haired ghost moved like a ghost, shuttling through the demonic beasts. His blood-red sickle was like the grim reaper reaping lives. Yi Guqin was no stranger to this ghostly movement. It was the shadow step of the shadow kill swordsmanship. It seems that the red-haired ghost also obtained the opportunity of the shadow kill swordsmanship. Yi Guchen was not surprised. With the red-haired ghost's strength, it was not difficult for him to obtain the shadow kill swordsmanship. More than 10 assassins, including Yi Guchen, were besieged by the demonic beasts. Some of the assassins had no strength to stay here, so they had to retreat. After all, compared to the opportunity, their lives were more important. As time passed, the smell of blood became thicker and thicker. It seemed to fill the sky and pile up into blood clouds. Although these attacking monstrous beasts were only rank 1 and rank 2 monstrous beasts, they could not be killed. If it were any other martial artist, they would have a feeling that there was no end to this. However, fatigue had already crept into his heart. Even Yi Guchen, who was brimming with qi and blood and had a strong physique, felt a little weak at this moment. Now, only Yi Guchen, the red-haired ghost, and Nightingale were left on the 6th floor. Yi Guchen and the red-haired ghost could still hold on, but Nightingale was drenched in sweat. Her situation was slightly worse. Whoosh! An arrow of blood suddenly shot towards Nightingale. It was the poisonous breath of a poisonous insect. Under the mask, Nightingale's expression changed dramatically. That sneak attack was difficult for her to avoid. Bang! A blood-colored sword ray shot out like a bolt of lightning, dispersing the poisonous breath. Nightingale abruptly turned her head and saw Yi Guchen calmly withdrawing his flying guillotine. Leave! These 3 simple words made Nightingale grit her teeth. At the beginning, when the Broken Sword Elder had wanted to take Yi Guchen as his disciple, Nightingale had been very jealous. But now she knew that there really were monstrous sword geniuses in this world. Yi Guchen was one of them. Suppressing the unwillingness in her heart, Nightingale glanced at the red-haired ghost, gritted her teeth, and left. Instantly, only Yi Guchen and the red-haired ghost were left on the 6th floor of the 18-blood prison. As expected of the 18-blood prison, it's only the 6th floor, and only the red-haired ghost and I are left of the 50 Iron Mask assassins. Yi Guchen was slightly out of breath. His body was already covered in blood. The blood-red mask contrasted with the blood, accentuating Yi Guchen's demeanor as the demon of the sword. Roar! Suddenly, a deafening roar of a beast could be heard. A pitch-black beast broke through the crowd of beasts and charged toward Yi Guchen and the red-haired ghost. That demonic beast was covered in pitch-black fur. Its 4 limbs were thick, and there were no eyes on its head, only an incomparably huge mouth. This beast is... Yi Guchen frowned. Although he knew many beasts, he did not know much about the beast in front of him. Boom! Before Yi Guchen could react, the red-haired ghost directly attacked the beast. The blood-red scythe in his hand carried an astonishing killing intent as it charged towards the beast. Why is the red-haired ghost doing this? Yi Guchen frowned. This was not the red-haired ghost style of doing things. However, the beast was not something an ordinary rank 1 or rank 2 beast could compare to. Yi Guchen estimated that it was comparable to a rank 3 beast. One must know that the golden-eyed horned dragon python, guarding the dragon blood transformation fruit, was a rank 3 beast. It was an existence that even Qi refinement grandmasters did not dare to face head-on, not to mention that they could not even use their Qi. However, the red-haired ghost's strength was clearly stronger than an ordinary Qi refinement grandmaster. When he used the shadow step, his figure was like a ghost. Although the beast was strong, it was difficult for it to catch the agile red-haired ghost. As for the red-haired ghost's blood-red scythe, although it could only leave a shallow wound on the beast's body, it was gradually being depleted. There must be a reason why the red-haired ghost attacked the beast. Yi Guchen thought to himself. He moved his feet, and also charged towards the beast. Seeing Yi Guchen also charging towards him, the red-haired ghost's cold eyes narrowed slightly under the mask. However, he did not attack Yi Guchen. The 2 of them attacked the beast at the same time. Roar! Faced with the pincer attack of the 2, the wounds on the beast's body gradually increased. This undoubtedly stimulated the beast's ferocity. Roar! An earth-shattering roar suddenly came from the beast's mouth. The beast opened its mouth wide like a black hole. All the spirit Qi in the surroundings was swallowed into the beast's mouth. What kind of technique is this? Yi Guchen's eyes were filled with shock. If we let this heaven-devouring beast continue, We will all fail. Suddenly, the red-haired ghost's hoarse voice sounded. Heaven-devouring beast? Before Yi Guqin could answer his doubts, the red-haired ghost took the initiative to attack. Blood-red echo. The red-haired ghost swung his blood-red scythe and spun it in the air. A terrifying blood-red wind suddenly spread out and swept towards the heaven-devouring beast. Boom! The blood-red wind cut into the heaven-devouring beast's body like a blade. The beast felt a wave of pain and let out a violent roar. Then, a black pillar of light with an aura of destruction suddenly shot out from the heaven-devouring beast's mouth. The ripples made the corners of Yi Guqin's eyes twitch. He felt extreme danger. Even a peak Qi refining stage grandmaster would not be able to withstand this attack. The expression in the red-haired ghost's eyes also changed. He gritted his teeth and summoned a defensive spiritual weapon. It formed a jet-black light shield in front of him that gave off a sturdy feeling like black iron. A supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon? Yi Guqin was astonished. A supreme-grade spiritual weapon was not a common item to begin with. As for a defensive spiritual weapon, it was even rarer than ordinary spiritual weapons. This made Yi Guqin even more wary of the red-haired ghost. As the 13th place on the Sheng Yuan Heaven's Pride list, the red-haired ghost must have a lot of trump cards up his sleeve. Just this supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon alone would likely be able to withstand the attacks of ordinary Qi refining stage grandmasters. Chapter 36. The black beam of light from the heaven-devouring beast's mouth landed on the shield of light in front of the red-haired ghost. Several cracks appeared on the supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon in an instant, and under the continuous bombardment of the black beam of light, the cracks widened. The red-haired ghost took advantage of this opportunity to use the shadow step. He flashed out and used another move to attack the heaven-devouring beast. Yi Guqin instinctively sensed that there must be an extraordinary opportunity on the heaven-devouring beast. Otherwise, the red-haired ghost would not have lost a rare supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon in order to kill the heaven-devouring beast. Kill! How could Yi Guqin fall behind the red-haired ghost? He moved his feet and used the shadow step as well. His figure instantly turned blurry, and after half a breath's time, it dissipated like a mist. It turned out to be an afterimage. The red-haired ghost caught this scene, and his pupils contracted under the mask. He had also obtained the shadow kill swordplay, and naturally recognized that Yi Guqin was using the shadow step, a movement technique hidden in the shadow kill swordplay. The red-haired ghost was not surprised that Yi Guqin could obtain the shadow kill swordplay, but he was surprised that Yi Guqin was using the shadow step with such proficiency that even he was not as good as Yi Guqin. The shadow step was paired with the shadow kill swordplay. From this, it could be inferred that Yi Guqin's control of the shadow kill swordplay must have reached a certain level. How is it possible? How long has it been since Sword Demon obtained the shadow kill swordplay? How can he control it to such an extent? Even with the shadow sword technique as a foundation, it's impossible. The red-haired ghost gritted his teeth. He could not believe that Yi Guqin had such talent in swordsmanship. The red-haired ghost also moved, holding the blood-colored scythe in one hand and the flying guillotine in the other. As he attacked the heaven-devouring beast, the flying guillotine suddenly turned its blade, and a black sword shadow attacked Yi Guqin. You finally can't hold back anymore? Yi Guqin had expected this. In the 18 Blood Prison, there was no rule that forbade one from attacking other assassins, but there had to be a limit. At the very least, one could not casually kill others. Of course, if he died in the 18 Blood Prisons, he could only blame it on his bad luck. The red-haired ghost attacking Yi Guqin made Yi Guqin even more certain that the heaven-devouring beast had a great opportunity. Yi Guqin wielded the flying guillotine and similarly swung his sword. A sword shadow whistled out and collided with the red-haired ghost's sword move. Afterwards, the two of them took action against the heaven-swallowing beast riddled with scars, while exchanging blows from time to time, releasing sneak attacks. It had to be said that the red-haired ghost was indeed strong, as the 12th ranked genius on the St. Yuan Heaven Pride list. Most importantly, this place had a suppressive effect on his true qi, preventing him from displaying his full strength. As for Yi Guqin, he could rely on his powerful body and sword techniques to contend with the red-haired ghost. Roar! The heaven-devouring beast once again let out an unwilling roar. Its body was riddled with scars, and it finally collapsed to the ground with a loud thud. The red-haired ghost's eyes suddenly turned sharp. He hurled his blood-colored scythe. The sharp scythe spun in the air and slashed along the heaven-devouring beast's head, leaving a trail of blood-colored mist in its wake. Then a pitch-black monster core appeared in its head. Yi Guqin narrowed his eyes, sensing the extraordinariness of the monster core. The red-haired ghost was the first to take action. His figure flashed as he headed straight for the pitch-black monster core. It seems that the opportunity lies in the monster core. Yi Guqin also used the shadow steps, his speed not much slower than the red-haired ghost's. The red-haired ghost's hoarse voice suddenly sounded, "Sword Demon, I admit that you do have some strength, but you are not qualified to compete with me for the monster core." "Is that so?" Yi Guqin's expression did not change. Holding the flying guillotine, he clearly had no intention of backing down. There was no one in the past, present, or future who could make the sword demon back down. "You have received the blood-colored mask from the Tower Master. Although I can't kill you, I can still teach you a lesson." The red-haired ghost brandished his blood-colored scythe. Although he did not inject any vital energy into it, the terrifying wind still tore through the air. It turned into a blood-red arc and slashed towards Yi Guqin. Just this fierce gust of wind was enough to kill an Essence Origin stage expert. However, Yi Guqin was not afraid. His vital energy and blood surged, forming the shape of a dragon and elephant. He stabbed out with his sword. The sword struck out like thunder, and the void seemed to explode with a thunderous boom. Boom! The two collided and both retreated. The red-haired ghost's eyes contained a hint of seriousness. Although he already knew that Yi Guqin's physical body was extraordinary, the direct observation made him feel that Yi Guqin was a threat. The red-haired ghost attacked again. He raised his blood-colored scythe vertically high, and then slashed it down. The harsh sound of the explosion was even about to tear people's eardrums. Great split! As the scythe slashed down, the surrounding void exploded. The strong wind pressure pressed the ground to crack. Yi Guqin's eyes flickered. He no longer held back and wielded his sword. Wisps of sword light intertwined to form a mysterious trajectory. What was more terrifying was that the sword light did not disperse. Instead, they intertwined and formed a terrifying sword net. Boundless Heaven Sword Art. This superior spiritual level swordsmanship was even more difficult than the shadow-killing swordsmanship. Even with Yi Guqin's talent, he had only reached the peak of the competent level, and was only one step away from the basic level. However, Yi Guqin was not in a hurry, even though he had been stuck at this step for a long time. At present, he could exert 50% of the power of the Boundless Heaven Sword Art. 50% of the power of the superior spiritual level swordsmanship was already very terrifying. However, when the blood-colored scythe crashed into the dense sword net, it was like a fish caught in a net, and could not break free. What kind of swordsmanship is this? There was a flash of surprise in the red-haired ghost's eyes. This unfamiliar swordsmanship gave him an extremely dangerous feeling. Moreover, this fluctuation could only be possessed by a spiritual level swordsmanship. Two spiritual level swordsmanship. Even in some aristocratic families with a good foundation, it was difficult to see a spiritual level swordsmanship. However, Yi Guqin actually possessed two spiritual level swordsmanship. Moreover, the red-haired ghost was certain that this spiritual level swordsmanship was not weaker than the shadow-killing swordsmanship. Sword Demon actually has such an opportunity. The red-haired ghost sighed in his heart. Boom! The blood-colored scythe could not break the trajectory of the Boundless Heaven Sword Art. However, Yi Guqin changed from defense to offense. The dense sword net suddenly spread out. Countless sharp sword rays surrounded the red-haired ghost like a net and attacked him. The red-haired ghost hurriedly took out the best defensive spiritual weapon. However, this jet-black light shield had been damaged by the heaven-swallowing beast's attack, and was now covered with spiderweb-like cracks. In the face of the attack of the Boundless Heaven Sword Art, this defensive spiritual weapon, which was already seriously damaged, directly collapsed and turned into specks of light. Yi Guchen took the opportunity to use the willow catkin wind movement technique. His figure moved and swept over the heaven-swallowing beast's head, directly putting the demon pearl into his origin ring. The red-haired ghost saw this, and the corners of his eyes twitched. He tightly grasped the blood-colored scythe, but did not attack again. "Do you still want to snatch it?" Yi Guchen said indifferently. "I didn't expect that the opportunity of the 6th level would be obtained by you. However, it doesn't matter. There are opportunities on every level of the 18 blood prisons. The further you go, the more precious the opportunities are. If you want the opportunity of the 6th level, then take it. However, the opportunities later humph." The red-haired ghost coldly glanced at Yi Guchen. He knew that there was nothing he could do to Yi Guchen in this place, where he could not use his qi. However, even if he could use his qi, the red-haired ghost figured that although he could suppress Yi Guchen, with Yi Guchen's abnormally strong physique and 2 spirit-level sword arts, it would still be difficult for him to defeat, or even kill Yi Guchen. Seeing that the red-haired ghost had tactfully retreated, Yi Guchen did not continue to pester him. After shaking off some demon beasts, he was not in a hurry to enter the next level. Instead, he began to ponder over the demon pearl. On the demon pearl, there were densely packed tiny characters engraved like ants. "This is a secret technique?" Yi Guchen was a little surprised. Chapter 37. In this world, in addition to martial arts cultivation skills, there were also secret skills. Secret skills had many uses, and were not limited to offensive and defensive means. For example, Yi Guchen's heart-concentrating spell was also a secret skill. However, it was just a common secret skill that could only calm one's mind. However, some secret skills had earth-shattering power, such as various offensive, amplifying, and defensive secret skills. Some very rare secret skills, if mastered, could be comparable to the gifted skills of a 7th-grade genius. This showed how rare and precious some secret skills were. However, such secret skills were usually extremely rare, and were far more precious than martial arts cultivation skills of the same level. Therefore, when Yi Guchen learned that the opportunity in the sky-devouring beast's demonic core was a secret skill, he was overjoyed. After some investigation, Yi Guchen was a little shocked. This secret skill was indeed extraordinary. It was called the sky-devouring secret skill. As the name implied, the sky-devouring secret skill could devour the surrounding spiritual qi of heaven and earth in a short period of time, and forcibly improve one's cultivation realm. If one cultivated it to a high level, the range of devouring would also be expanded, and the amplifying effect would be stronger. Of course, there was a price to pay to use this secret skill. In addition to being extremely weak after using it, there was also a requirement on one's physical body. If one's physical body was ordinary, it would not be able to withstand such a huge intake of spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Not only would it not improve one's cultivation realm, but it would also risk exploding and dying. However, Yi Guchen's strength was his physical body. This sky-devouring secret skill seemed to be tailor-made for Yi Guchen. My physical body has reached the profound realm of the muscle-bone strengthening scripture, and I have passed the second blood test of the physical body. It is enough for me to use the sky-devouring secret skill without any scruples. Yi Guchen's eyes were filled with excitement. The biggest gap between him and those God-favored geniuses was their cultivation realm. If he mastered the sky-devouring secret skill, it would undoubtedly make up for this gap temporarily. For the next difficult bloody mission, Yi Guchen, who had mastered the sky-devouring secret skill, would have a greater chance of success. Without any hesitation, Yi Guchen found a secluded place and began to cultivate the soul-devouring secret skill. In order to cultivate the soul-devouring secret technique, the first step was to refine the demonic core and refine the strand of devouring power that belonged to the heaven-devouring beast. Using this strand of devouring power to draw in the surrounding spiritual qi and circulate it in the body through a special method, it was called soul-devouring. Boom! Yi Guchen placed the heaven-devouring beast's Yao core in his palm. Immediately, his qi and blood surged out like a fire lotus, enveloping the Yao core and refining it. As time passed, The heaven-devouring beast's core gradually turned into a viscous black liquid. "Disperse!" Yi Guchen bellowed. The black liquid splashed out, and a black light suddenly appeared within it. It seemed to have a mind of its own as it tried to escape into the void. How could Yi Guchen let it leave? He immediately wrapped the qi and blood around it and swallowed it. In an instant, Yi Guchen's body shook. He felt a terrifying devouring power erupt in his body, absorbing Yi Guchen's qi and blood. Fortunately, Yi Guchen's qi and blood were robust. He hurriedly activated his qi and blood fire. His entire body was like a man of fire. He was like a pill furnace, refining this strand of devouring power. While Yi Guchen was gradually refining this strand of devouring power, Yi Guchen's mind was greatly shaken. The scene in front of him changed. It was no longer the space of the 18-blood prison, but a desolate land. The land was crimson and bleak. There was no life within 10,000 miles. The spiritual qi of the entire world was extremely scarce, and not a single blade of grass could grow. And on this land that seemed like it had come from ancient times, an incomparably huge strange beast was entrenched between the heavens and the earth. This strange beast was like a heaven-devouring beast that had been magnified countless times. However, its savage and primordial aura was far more powerful than that of a heaven-devouring beast. The so-called heaven-devouring beast was as tiny as an ant in front of this strange beast. "This strange beast is..." Yi Guchen frowned. "Roar." Suddenly, the strange beast roared, its roar shaking the 9 heavens. Its head only had a huge bloody mouth like a black hole. A whirlpool of chaotic black mist circulated within it. The strange beast roared at the sky. The endless spiritual qi in the 9 heavens seemed to be drawn in by this strange beast's huge mouth. "Taotai!" Yi Guchen exclaimed. Such a primordial exotic beast made Yi Guchen feel small and insignificant in front of it. He suddenly realized that the heaven-devouring beast might have a trace of the ancient Taoyi's bloodline, which was why it could possess the soul-devouring secret technique. After all, the Taotai was the most representative primordial fierce beast that could control the devouring power. In the face of the shocking scene of the Taotai swallowing the sky, Yi Guchen did not panic too much. He knew that perhaps it was because he had refined the devouring power and accidentally inherited some of the memories hidden in the depths of the bloodline energy. But just as Yi Guchen was thinking, the scene in front of him suddenly changed drastically. The Taotai that had dominated the primordial chaos was lying in a pool of blood. A blurry figure was standing on top of the Taoyi's body that looked like a primordial demon mountain. Who is it? He can actually kill Taotai. Just as Yi Guchen was feeling suspicious, the blurry figure suddenly muttered to himself. Killed the Taotai, used its bones, blood, and heart to forge the sword body, and the devouring core as the core of power to create an ancient famous sword and pass on the heaven-devouring secret technique. What? Yi Guchen's breathing stopped for a moment. Create an ancient famous sword and pass on the heaven-devouring secret technique? The primordial famous sword records were divided into the heaven and earth lists. The heaven list famous swords were born from heaven and earth, and could not be forged by humans. However, the 72 famous swords on the earth list were all forged by humans. Those who nurtured the primordial famous swords were either peerless great emperors of the sword principle, or divine craftsmen, who surpassed the 9-star craftsmen. Moreover, it was different from the fixed ranking of the heaven ranking. If a powerful famous sword appeared in the future, it would replace some of the famous swords that were ranked at the bottom of the earth ranking. Therefore, the earth-ranking famous swords that had been passed down since ancient times would only become stronger and stronger. And that blurry figure actually wanted to use the primordial fierce beast Taotai as a casting material to forge a peerless famous sword that could enter the earth list. This already represented the identity of that person, a divine craftsman. Just as Yi Guchen was sighing in his heart, everything in front of him was washed away like waves of water. Yi Guchen's mind returned, and the scene in front of him returned to the 6th floor of the blood prison. I just don't know if that person used the Taotai to forge an ancient famous sword. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly. However, there was one thing that he was concerned about. The sky-devouring secret technique that the figure had mentioned. Sky-devouring secret technique. Spirit-devouring secret technique. The difference of one word was like the difference between heaven and earth. It seems that my spirit-devouring secret technique should be a weakened version of the sky-devouring secret technique. According to that person, he might have passed down the so-called sky-devouring secret technique in his famous swords. Yi Guchen pondered but immediately shook his head. It was not enough to draw a conclusion based on some half-real images. Moreover, if primordial famous swords were so easy to find, they would not be called primordial famous swords. Not to mention Yi Guchen, even some of the peerless experts ranked at the peak of the 9 regions would not be able to obtain a primordial famous sword without absolute strength and luck. It should be known that the primordial famous swords that existed in the 9 regions were the 9 heaven-list famous swords that hung above the firmament of the 9 regions. They replaced the blazing sun and bright moon to illuminate the earth. Well, now is not the time to think about these illusory things. Let's break through the 8 hells first. Yi Guchen thought, and once again set off for the next floor. Chapter 38. Outside the 18-blood prison, the demon judge and netherworld judge Yuli stood in the darkness. Although they did not enter the 18-blood prison, they knew the situation inside. As expected of the person chosen by the House Lord, Yi Guchen not only obtained the Shadow Kill Sword technique, but also the spirit-devouring secret technique from the red-haired ghost. Yuli praised. Now the red-haired ghost and Yi Guchen have both passed the 7th level. The 8th level is a watershed in the 18-blood prison. From this level onwards, it will not only test one's cultivation, but also one's mind, will, soul, and so on. Every level after this is like a natural moat, the demon judge said in a low voice. Although there were many risks in the previous trials, there was still a certain gap between them and the 18-blood prison that was rumored to be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. This was because the first few trials were the most basic tests, and the true difficulty only began after the 8th trial. However, although the later levels are very difficult, the opportunities are far from what the previous levels can compare to, Yuli said. That depends on whether they have the strength or not, the demon judge said coldly. 8th level of the 18-blood prison. After cultivating the spirit-devouring secret technique, Yi Guchen directly arrived at this level. Whether he could pass or not, he would be directly sent out afterwards. Because they could only enter the first 8 levels of the 18-blood prison this time. As soon as he entered the 8th level, Yi Guchen suddenly felt that this place was unusual. This was an underground cave. A dark river meandered through it like a waterfall. In the middle of the cave, there was a figure sitting cross-legged. This figure was covered in dust, and did not have the slightest trace of vitality. Although the body was withered like a dried walnut, it did not rot. The body was difficult to rot. This was one of the signs of breaking through the life and death threshold, and crossing the heaven and earth spirit bridge. On the finger of this corpse there was an ancient origin ring. However, the reason why Yi Guchen thought the 8th level of the 18-blood prison was unusual was not because of the scene in front of him and the mysterious corpse. It was because Yi Guchen had seen this scene and this corpse before. The scene here was the same as the Sword King's secret realm of the North River Sword King Chu Donglu, and the corpse sitting cross-legged was the North River Sword King, Chu Donglu. Yi Guchen suddenly felt a sharp pain in his back. The tip of a blood-stained sword pierced through his chest. He turned around, and what he saw was Xia Yubing's beautiful face that was dyed in blood. Yi Guchen, I bet you never imagined that you, the leader of the 7 chosen of the Milky Way Prefecture, the young sword grandmaster, would have such a day. Xia Yubing. A trace of surprise flashed through Yi Guchen's eyes, but there was no anger on his face. Instead, he calmly shook his head. Is this the 8th level of the 18-blood prison? I've already begun to touch upon the soul realm, Yi Guchen muttered. Everything in front of him was clearly an illusion. However, this illusion revealed the deepest resentment and regret in people's hearts. Not to mention whether the challenger could see through it. Even if they could and knew that it was just an illusion, how many people could remain calm in the face of the deep-rooted resentment in their lives? Unfortunately, this Yi Guchen was not the Yi Guchen of the past. Although he had occupied Yi Guchen's body and inherited all of Yi Guchen's memories, Duge Wubai still had his own memories and soul. Therefore, he was not afraid of the soul realm targeted at Yi Guqin, and would not fall into it. Haha, I didn't expect that there would be a 7th grade heaven's pride in this small Saint origin dynasty, and with such a strong talent. Suddenly, a slightly lazy and disdainful laugh came from not far away. Upon hearing this voice, even the indifferent Yi Guqin slowly furrowed his brows and looked towards the source of the voice. It was an extremely handsome young man. He wore a Big Dipper robe and a Mizar star crown on his head. His expression was indifferent and calm, and he carried an innate confidence. This confidence came from his talent, strength, and background. One of the Big Dipper 7, Mizar star Gu Xiaoyang. A heaven's pride with talent, strength, and influence. Like Yi Guqin, Gu Xiaoyang was also a 7th grade heaven's pride with powerful talent. It could be said that Gu Xiaoyang was definitely Yi Guqin's greatest enemy. He was even more difficult to deal with than Xia Yubing, who had obtained the North River Sword King's inheritance. Now, in this illusion, Yi Guqin was confronting Gu Xiaoyang again. Are you Gu Xiaoyang? Yi Guqin's expression returned to normal. After all, he had the sword demon's soul, so he could still treat Gu Xiaoyang indifferently. You are also a 7th grade heaven's pride, and I am very interested in the innate sword embryo in your body. If I can obtain your sword embryo, my strength will rise again, far surpassing the other 6. Gu Xiaoyang smiled, as if it was a matter of course. Boom! A powerful profound qi exploded in Yi Guqin's body. It was Xia Yubing's sneak attack. Yi Guqin spat out a mouthful of blood and flew forward. Secret art of wedding dress, Gu Xiaoyang muttered. As his hands moved, a terrifying amount of true qi burst out and directly pulled Yi Guqin's body over. Then, he stretched out his hand and pierced into Yi Guqin's dantian in his abdomen. Although it was just an illusion, the pain was incomparably real. However, compared to the pain of his abdomen being pierced, the pain of his innate ability being stripped away was the most unbearable. No wonder Yi Guqin hated Gu Xiaoyang to the bone. Buzz! A shocking sword sound came from Yi Guqin's abdomen. It was a sword embryo about the size of a palm. It was sparkling and translucent. It didn't look like a sword embryo, but more like a piece of spiritual jade. This was Yi Guqin's foundation as a 7th grade heaven's pride. His innate ability, the innate sword embryo. Clang! As if sensing that its master was about to leave, the innate sword embryo struggled desperately, as if it had a mind of its own. Then with a clang, it turned into a 3-foot-long flying sword. As soon as the innate sword embryo appeared, even Gu Xiaoyang's true qi was cut in half by the sword qi. As expected of an innate ability, Gu Xiaoyang sighed. At the same time, his eyes suddenly changed, as if there were 2 miniature stars hidden in them. At the same time, a crack suddenly appeared in the middle of Gu Xiaoyang's forehead. Then an eye appeared. A third eye. This eye was dark blue like the starry sky. At the same time, it shone with specks of crystal light, looking deep and mysterious. This was Gu Xiaoyang's innate ability as a 7th grade heaven's pride, the eye of the stars. Starry sky divine light. Gu Xiaoyang's true qi gathered between his eyebrows. A deep beam of light containing extremely terrifying energy shot out and bombarded the innate sword embryo. The sword qi of the innate sword embryo blocked the power of the starry sky divine light. However, its master Yi Guqin was seriously injured. Naturally, the innate sword embryo's power was not at its peak. Give it to me. Gu Xiaoyang used the power shifter secret skill again, trying to control and refine the innate sword embryo. Although it's just an illusion, you can forget about taking away the innate sword embryo again. Yi Guqin's eyes shone brightly. At the same time, the golden light on his body was like water waves. Yi Guqin used his Vajra body to the extreme. His wound stopped bleeding instantly. Boundless heaven sword art. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Guqin directly used his strongest sword move. Starry sword art. Gu Xiaoyang also used his sword. Although the two didn't meet face to face, they were already fighting in the illusion. Chapter 39. Clang. Dazzling sparks erupted as the swords collided. Yi Guqin's boundless heaven sword art was impenetrable, like an inescapable net that enveloped Gu Xiaoyang. What Gu Xiaoyang used was the star sword art, a unique sword technique of Star Universe Sword Pavilion. The sword light was as bright as the Milky Way, but it carried a fatal killing intent. Although this was only an illusion of the 8th level of the 18 blood prison, it was extremely real. Even the sparks that erupted when the swords collided were flawless. An ordinary person might really be immersed in the illusion and be unable to extricate himself. However, Yi Guchen faced it with a cold attitude. Let me experience the power of the innate sword embryo first. Yi Guchen waved one hand. The innate sword embryo seemed to have a mind of its own and turned into a streak of flowing light, flying to Yi Guchen. Sooner or later, I will really take you back. Now, let me experience your power first, Yi Guchen muttered to himself. The gifted magic of a 7th-class genius was not to be underestimated. As a sword genius, Yi Guchen's gifted magic of the innate sword embryo was naturally not to be underestimated. Yi Guchen moved his palms, and the innate sword embryo erupted with dazzling spiritual light. An extremely sharp sword light tore through the sky and earth, and pierced towards Gu Xiaoyang. Starry sky barrier. The stellar eye between Gu Xiaoyang's eyebrows flashed again. As the starlight surged, it formed an impenetrable barrier in front of him. Boom! The innate sword ray fell on the starry sky barrier and erupted with violent fluctuations. The white light and the starlight reflected each other. Although it looked magnificent, it contained terrifying power. Break! As soon as Yi Guchen finished speaking, the innate sword embryo erupted with buzzing and trembling sounds again. It randomly transformed into countless innate sword rays, each of which was extremely sharp and seemed to be able to pierce through the sky. Is this the power of the gifted magic? Yi Guchen sighed. This was only a phantom image in the illusion, yet it was able to manifest such power. It was no wonder that Gu Xiaoyang coveted the real innate sword embryo so much. Boom! 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 Countless explosions seemed to resound at the same time. Gu Xiaoyang's starry sky barrier exploded into a sky full of stars. Regardless of whether it's Xia Yubing or Gu Xiaoyang, both of them are merely small pebbles on my path to the peak of the sword Dao. It's impossible for such an illusory test to trap me. Yi Guchen waved his hand, and the scene before him instantly dissipated like quicksand. The entire Sword King mystic realm, Xia Yubing, Gu Xiaoyang, the innate sword embryo, everything was annihilated in an instant. The scene in front of him changed. Yi Guchen suddenly discovered that he was inside an array formation. The reason why he came to this conclusion was because there were layers upon layers of array formation patterns beneath Yi Guchen's feet. These array formation patterns were dark red like blood and looked rather bloody and strange. Outside the array formation, there were 12 blood-red flying swords inserted into the grooves on the ground. Every flying sword was mottled with the color of blood, as if they had been soaked in blood for a long time. These 12 blood-red flying swords all carried a thick, bloody and baleful aura. Just as Yi Guchen's thoughts were solemn, the blood-red array formation on the ground suddenly began to operate. In an instant, the blood-red light filled the sky. The 12 blood-red flying swords seemed to be pulled by something. They buzzed and trembled, and rose from the ground. They turned into 12 blood-red lights, and intertwined with each other as they charged towards Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows. He held the flying guillotine in his hand, and used the willow catkin wind movement technique. His figure instantly became faintly discernible. As for the 12 flying swords, they intertwined into blood-red light beams, and charged towards Yi Guchen. Clang! 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 Although Yi Guchen's willow catkin wind movement technique was very nimble, the 12 blood-red flying swords relied on the array formation to operate. They were flexible and strange, and at the same time powerful. Although Yi Guchen dodged a few of the swords, he still had to use the flying guillotine to break them. When the swords touched, Yi Guchen only felt an unparalleled force vibrate, and it shook Yi Guchen's arm until it was numb. At the same time, an extremely violent blood-red force was transmitted into Yi Guchen's arm through the swords. This force, Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. He could feel that this force was extremely violent, like a rampaging beast. Even the profound qi in his body could only retreat in front of this blood-red force. If this violent force was allowed to wreak havoc in his body, Yi Guchen would not be able to withstand it, and his life might even be in danger. This was because Yi Guchen's body was so strong that he could withstand it for a short period of time. If it were an ordinary cultivator in the qi refining realm, he would be severely injured within a few breaths. This sword formation is really difficult to deal with. Yi Guqin's body was covered in a faint golden light, which was the manifestation of activating the Vajra celestial body. At the same time, Yi Guqin still had to resist and dodge the attacks of the blood-red flying swords. What should I do? As time went by, Yi Guqin's injuries gradually worsened, and his tendons and meridians were somewhat twisted. However, even in such an extreme situation, Yi Guqin's expression was still calm. Got it! Yi Guqin's black eyes suddenly lit up. As his profound qi circulated, it activated the devouring power that was left in his dantian. This devouring power came from the monster elixir of the heaven-devouring beast, and it was the foundation of the soul-devouring secret skill. Although Yi Guqin did not know whether the devouring power could deal with this violent blood-red force, he had no other choice. With the activation of his profound qi, the devouring power also circulated quietly, spreading throughout Yi Guqin's body, and immediately collided with the blood-red force. Yi Guqin heaved a sigh of relief. In the face of the devouring power, no matter how violent the blood-red force was, it was completely devoured and refined. It was obvious that the devouring power was still able to suppress the blood-red force. However, the degree of danger of this blood-red force also made Yi Guqin very fearful. He relied on his strong body and the devouring power to resist this blood-red force. If it were an ordinary qi refining realm grandmaster, if he did not have any special means, he would be in a very miserable state, and even be in danger of dying. However, although Yi Guqin had found a way to resist the blood-red force, he could not get out of the sword formation for the time being. How should I get out of here or? Yi Guqin was thinking, and at the same time, many sword wounds appeared on his body. After all, Yi Guqin's cultivation was only at level 8 of the essence origin, and he was still somewhat powerless when he was trapped in such a dangerous sword formation. However, his body had passed the second minor tribulation of the blood tribulation of the physical body, so he had a strong recovery ability. Although he could not fully recover, he could still heal and stop the bleeding temporarily. Although his injuries were getting worse, and his body was getting tired, Yi Guqin did not panic at all. His eyes followed the tracks of the 12 blood-red flying swords, and at the same time, they corresponded with the blood-red formation on the ground. Yi Guqin was not proficient in formations, but as long as it was about swords, as long as he had the soul of the sword devil, he would not be unfamiliar with it. This sword formation is very ferocious. The swords are fierce and sharp, but they have hidden tracks. As long as it is a formation, it must have a core. Once the core is refined, the sword formation will be broken. If one understood one method, all methods would be understood. Yi Guqin, who had an innate advantage in sword principle, also had an advantage when facing the sword formation. After 102 more moves, the point where the 12 flying swords converge will be the flaw. Finally, Yi Guqin's starry eyes, which were like the night sky, suddenly lit up. His body was covered in wounds, and he was completely exhausted. Clang! When the 12 flying swords attacked Yi Guqin at the same time, Yi Guqin's profound qi surged. At the same time, some white light patterns suddenly spread out on his body. These white light patterns, like the veins of a human body, gradually formed on the surface of Yi Guqin's body. Counting them carefully, there were a total of 36 white light patterns. Universal Sword Codex Sword Range. Chapter 40. The Universal Sword Mantra was a sword cultivation method passed down to Yi Guqin by his father. Previously, Yi Guqin had practiced the first part of the mantra and cultivated 108 sword veins. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by Gu Xiaoyang. Later on, after receiving the 100 veins blood ginseng from Xuansu, Yi Guqin cultivated 36 sword veins again. However, he was still far from 360 sword veins. Even so, the power of the sword veins could not be underestimated. Although it was not an offensive method, it was like a secret technique that could greatly increase the power of Yi Guqin's sword qi. Vacuum sword wave overlapping waves. Yi Guqin used vacuum sword wave. 20 transparent sword waves rippled in the void. At the same time, the sword veins on Yi Guchen's body gave off a dazzling light. Almost in an instant, the power of Yi Guchen's overlapping waves increased again. The waves were like the rolling waves of the sea. The powerful sword wave swept out in all directions. Even the ground covered with formation diagrams faintly cracked. Boom! The vacuum sword wave that had been amplified by the sword veins accurately struck the weak point where the flying swords converged. It could be said that if the timing had been a second earlier, a second later, or if the position had been slightly off, the weak point would have disappeared in an instant. However, Yi Guchen, with his keen sense of the path of the sword, struck the weak point perfectly. Rumble! With a loud rumble, the 12 blood-red flying swords burst out in an instant. As if they had lost control, they flew around randomly. The ground also rapidly cracked and shattered. A blood-red formation plate suddenly appeared in Yi Guchen's sight. The blood-red formation plate was about the size of a palm. Its surface was engraved with extremely complicated formation inscriptions. After Yi Guchen cracked the sword formation, the 12 blood-red flying swords turned into 12 streams of light and escaped into the formation plate. Just as the sword formation was destroyed, the demon magistrate and nether magistrate exchanged glances. A sliver of surprise flashed through their eyes. The little Ashura sword formation was actually broken. Yu Li's tone still carried a trace of surprise. The so-called little Ashura sword formation might only be a small problem for experts like them. However, it was quite a threat to Qi refinement stage and even divine soul stage experts. This Yi Guchen is indeed worthy of being called the young sword grandmaster. He has an extraordinary understanding of the way of the sword. Even the little Ashura sword formation was broken by him. The demon judge also had an indescribable look of surprise. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that if we can break the little Ashura sword formation, we'll have the right to face the 17th level of the 18 blood prison. Both the demon judge and Yu Li felt a lingering fear when they thought of that level. They were considered to be extremely strong, but they didn't even have the courage to face the checkpoint on the 17th floor. Only the house master can pass that level with ease. Now, the only ones who have the right to enter the 17th floor and obtain the opportunity, there are only two people. The demon judge's tone carried a trace of inexplicable meaning. One is Yi Guchen, and the other is Yi Shicho. Yu Li said, "Haha, this is interesting. I'm really looking forward to the day when Yi Guchen and Yi Shicho face each other," the demon judge whispered. On the 8th floor, the surroundings returned to a dead silence. The ground cracked and shattered, and Yi Guchen's body was covered in sword wounds, dripping with blood. This level was extremely dangerous. If Yi Guchen hadn't cultivated his physical body, if he hadn't obtained the secret skill of spirit devouring, the outcome might have been completely different. However, there were no ifs, so Yi Guchen had passed through this level without any mishap. The power of Sword Vein had indeed exceeded Yi Guchen's expectations. At that moment, he had only recovered 36 sword veins. If he were to recover all 108 sword veins, how much more powerful would his sword moves be? If he were to go one level higher, he would be able to cultivate the first volume of Universal Sword Principle to the phenomenal level, cultivate 360 sword veins, and form a Dejotian cycle. How powerful would it be? Yi Guchen was looking forward to it. As for the second volume of Universal Sword Principle, one could only cultivate it after the first volume was completed. However, at that moment, Yi Guchen's attention was still on the formation board in his hand. The crimson formation board was filled with a ruthless aura, with a strong smell of blood. In the formation board, there were 12 mini flying swords. If the formation board was activated, it would turn into 12 crimson flying swords. As for the power of the sword formation, Yi Guchen had already experienced it for himself. This sword formation is where the opportunity of the 8th floor lies, Yi Guchen muttered. Yi Guchen was not proficient in formation, but he knew a little about it. The classification of formation was not as complicated as that of martial arts. There were 3 levels: heaven, earth, and human. Each level was divided into high, middle, and low grades. A human-level formation was enough to pose a threat to Qi refining realm and divine soul realm experts. An Earth-level formation was extremely rare, and a Heaven-level formation mostly existed in legends. Although Yi Guqin was not interested in formation, the sword formation had given Yi Guqin a new understanding of sword principle. Sword formation is also a form of swordsmanship. It is beneficial for understanding the essence of swordsmanship. Moreover, I was not proficient in sword formation in my previous life. Now that I have such an opportunity, I should not let it go. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. He wanted to refine the sword formation. In order to refine and control the sword formation, the first thing to do was to refine the formation board. Yi Guqin began to refine the formation board. His qi and blood surged out. At the same time, he used his blood essence as a primer to establish a connection with the formation board. Not long after, Yi Guqin faintly felt that when he activated the formation board, there were 12 weak responses in the depths of his consciousness. They were the 12 blood-red flying swords. After refining the formation board, Yi Guqin learned the name of the sword formation, Little Ashura Sword Formation. At the same time, Yi Guqin finally understood what the extremely difficult and violent blood-red power was. It was the power of Ashura. Could this Little Ashura Sword Formation be related to the Ashura Sword intent? Yi Guqin could not help but think in this direction. However, there was not much Ashura power in the Little Ashura Sword Formation, and it was not very pure. Even so, it was already a huge threat to Yi Guqin. One could imagine how much Yi Guqin's strength would soar if he could comprehend the true Ashura sword intent. I can feel that this Little Ashura Sword Formation is only a prototype. Although its power is not bad, there are still many imperfections. It can only be ranked as a low-grade mortal sword formation. Even so, with the Ashura power hidden in the flying swords, it is enough to threaten a chi-refining realm warrior. Even a divine soul realm warrior could fall for it if he is not careful. Yi Guqin evaluated the power of the Little Ashura Sword Formation. He always had a feeling that after this Little Ashura Sword Formation, there would be an even more terrifying existence. However, there was no need to think so much at the moment. Even if it was just the Little Ashura Sword Formation, Yi Guqin would have a hard time controlling it. A true sword formation required at least a divine soul realm warrior to control the flying swords with the power of the soul. Only then could its power be maximized. However, Yi Guqin was only a profound origin realm warrior. He had not even cultivated his genuine qi. If he used his profound origin to control the blood-red flying swords, their power would be reduced. Moreover, he would not be able to control them as freely as he could with the power of the soul. Before, when the Little Ashura Sword Formation operated on its own, it was extremely powerful. When Yi Guqin tried it, he could only temporarily control 3 or 4 flying swords. Moreover, their flight was extremely unstable. This was also because Yi Guqin had a deep understanding of the way of the sword. Therefore, he could control 3 or 4 flying swords in such a short period of time. I need to slowly familiarize myself with the way of the sword formation. Let's leave this place first. Yi Guqin pondered and prepared to leave. Even though he had passed the 8th floor, he could only leave. If he wanted a chance to enter, he had to fill up the flying guillotine. The next time I enter the 18 prisons of blood, my goal will be the Ashura sword intent. Yi Guqin looked into the depths of the darkness. Vaguely, there seemed to be an extremely terrifying sword intent brewing in the depths of the 18 prisons of blood. That sword intent seemed to have the tragic aura of a Ashura that could tear apart everything in the world. Chapter 41. Sword Intent. It was a power that only 1 in 10,000 sword geniuses could grasp. Different sword intents brought about different power bonuses. Although Yi Guqin did not know what kind of sword intent Xia Yubing possessed, he was confident that the Ashura sword intent was not inferior to Xia Yubing's sword intent. If I have a flexible sword, I can comprehend the hard and soft sword intent again, Yi Guqin thought. However, he did not have any ideas about this. After this, Yi Guqin directly left the 18 blood prisons. It could be said that Yi Guqin had gained a lot from this trip to the 18 blood prisons. Not only did he reach the 8th level of the Essence Realm, but he also obtained a spirit-grade sword technique, the Shadow Assassination Sword Technique. as well as the spirit-devouring secret technique and the little Ashura sword formation. Previously, Yi Guqin had only used the most basic shadow sword technique when he acted as the blood-listening tower sword demon. This was because Yi Guqin did not want to expose his true identity. But now, with the shadow assassination sword technique, the spirit-devouring secret technique, and the little Ashura sword formation, the sword demon he had transformed into had a lot more tricks up his sleeves. After ending the 18 blood prisons, Yi Guqin and the other assassins also received a few days of rest. After this period of rest, they would listen to the demon judge's orders and officially participate in the blood mission. In these few days, Yi Guqin also adjusted himself to his peak state and discussed forging techniques with Chu Shiqing from time to time. Yi Guqin was also very interested in forging swords. After all, many of the famed swords on the ancient sword records Earth ranking were forged by divine blacksmiths. It was just like the illusory scene that Yi Guqin saw when refining the heaven-devouring beast's core. The blurry figure used the primordial vicious beast Taotai as a material to forge a terrifying demonic sword that could devour the heavens and earth. Yi Guqin also wanted to forge a sword that completely belonged to him. However, during this time, the old drunkard appeared before Yi Guqin again. The first thing he said was that he wanted Yi Guqin to treat him to a drink. In a private room of a restaurant, the old drunkard drank until his cheeks were bright red. He was a little drunk. Yi Guqin only took 2 sips. After 3 rounds of drinking, the old drunkard suddenly took out a sword and placed it on the table before continuing to drink. Jiechen. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. To a swordsman, the sword was his partner. However, at this moment, Yi Guqin could not recognize the Calamity Dust sword. Although the Calamity Dust sword was still simple and natural at this moment, it didn't seem old anymore. The body of the sword was like a cold spring, and the lightning markings reflected a cold light. The biggest difference between Jiechen and the previous one was that there were 2 extremely complicated patterns on the sword. Previously, these lines were extremely blurry, as if they had experienced extreme wear and tear. But now, the 2 complicated lines were extremely clear, and they were almost perfectly connected with the lines on the sword. Spirit runes. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. The 2 complicated lines were undoubtedly spirit runes. Moreover, they were spirit runes that had been restored to a complete state after being repaired. The current Jiechen could truly be called a spirit rune divine weapon. Yi Guqin turned to look at the old drunkard. He was still drinking by himself, as if the Calamity Dust sword had nothing to do with him. Previously, Yi Guqin had guessed that the old drunkard must be somewhat extraordinary, but the old drunkard's ability was still beyond his expectations. This old man who loved to drink was at least a 4-star forging master. However, even a 4-star forging master would find it very difficult to repair the Calamity Dust sword in such a short period of time. Therefore, Yi Guqin guessed that this old drunkard should be at least a 5-star forging master. The higher the star rank, the higher the status of the forging master. One must know that Chu Shiqing's father, the great pavilion master of the heavenly forging pavilion, was only a 3-star forging master. He was still a threshold away from becoming a 4-star forging master. However, even with such a level, he was still an extremely famous existence in the Saint Origin dynasty. If the old drunkard's identity as a 5-star forging master was exposed, the royal family of the Saint Origin dynasty would probably treat him as a Buddha and worship him in the palace. With the old drunkard's character, as long as he was willing, not to mention the entire South Sky region, at least in the Saint Origin dynasty, all forces would respect him and not dare to offend him. However, even with such an identity, the old drunkard still drowned his sorrows in alcohol all day long. This made Yi Guqin somewhat puzzled. However, everyone had their secrets. Before becoming close friends with the old drunkard, Yi Guqin would not rashly inquire about his secrets. This would only make things unpleasant. Senior, I may go on a long journey in the future. These crystal jades are for Senior to buy wine. Yi Guqin waved his hand, and an origin ring fell in front of the old drunkard. There were a total of 1,000 crystal jades in it. Previously, Chu Shiqing had given Yi Guqin 10,000 crystal jades. so Yi Guchen did not lack crystal jades for the time being. However, the value of the old drunkard's repair was far from what 1,000 crystal jades could measure. This was just a small token of appreciation from Yi Guchen. At least you have some conscience. The old drunkard took the origin ring and continued to drink. By the way, I wonder if Senior knows the method of forging a flexible sword. Yi Guchen hesitated for a moment and asked. Although he knew that he was asking for too much, Yi Guchen had no other choice. A flexible sword with divine spiritual inscriptions was really difficult to obtain. Even Chu Shiqing's father, the great pavilion master, probably did not have a 30% chance of success. And there was only one piece of golden heavenly silkworm steel. Therefore, the only person that Yi Guchen could think of was the old drunkard in front of him. Boy, do you really think I'm a blacksmith? The old drunkard blew his beard and glared fiercely at Yi Guchen. I don't mean that. I just urgently need a flexible sword with divine spiritual inscriptions. I have no other choice but to brace myself and ask Senior. Yi Guchen's tone was neither servile nor overbearing. There was no hint of flattery in it. Forging a flexible sword is different from forging a hard sword. Not only are the materials needed more, but they are also rarer. The value of forging a flexible sword is enough to forge 5 hard swords of the same level. The old drunkard snorted coldly. I have something that may be the core material for forging a flexible sword. Yi Guchen took out the golden heavenly silkworm steel. This is golden heavenly silkworm steel? Seeing such a precious material, the old drunkard was obviously a little surprised. He did not expect that Yi Guchen actually had such a rare material. Yes, the golden heavenly silkworm steel is of good quality. Its toughness is indeed excellent. It is a good material for forging a flexible sword, but it is not enough. The old drunkard shook his head. What other materials do you need? Yi Guchen asked. I don't intend to help you forge. It doesn't matter if I tell you the materials. The old drunkard said coldly, and told him some of the materials needed for forging a flexible sword. After that, Yi Guchen frowned slightly. Although he knew that forging a flexible sword would require a lot of rare materials, the requirements were still beyond his expectations. Yi Guchen could barely find most of the materials, but there were 3 things that were not easy to get. Chapter 42. These 3 things were the mysterious silver heavy water, the rare fire of heaven and earth, and the spiritual seal. Among them, the mysterious silver heavy water was an extremely rare casting material. Its texture was as viscous as mercury. Adding a little mysterious silver heavy water to any spiritual weapon could make it as solid as a whole. Not only that, its most peculiar characteristic was that it could change between hardness and softness. It could be as hard as diamond in an instant, or it could be turned into liquid metal. As a material for making a soft sword, it was very suitable. The rare fire of heaven and earth was some strange fire that existed between heaven and earth. It could be used to make ordinary spiritual chi, but if one wanted to make a weapon above the spiritual inscription weapon, the rare fire of heaven and earth was indispensable. Some 4-star forging masters almost all had their own rare fire of heaven and earth. According to Yi Guchen's guess, the old drunkard should also have a rare fire of heaven and earth. But obviously, the old drunkard did not have a deep friendship with him, so he could not use the rare fire of heaven and earth for him. Even the old drunkard did not agree to help him make a sword. So Yi Guchen could only find the rare fire of heaven and earth by himself. As for the last spiritual seal, it was the carrier of the spiritual inscription. The reason why the spiritual inscription weapon was called spiritual inscription weapon was that, in addition to the power of the materials, the most important thing was that it had spiritual inscriptions. Different spiritual inscriptions could bring different power to the spiritual inscription weapon. For example, the broken edge spiritual inscription on the tribulation dust could make the sword chi have the effect of breaking edge after it was activated. It had a great penetrating effect on any genuine chi protection and defensive spiritual weapon. The thunderstorm spiritual inscription could make the tribulation dust burst out with the power of thunder and lightning, which was more powerful. It could be said that a high-grade spiritual seal brought about an incomparably huge bonus effect. Since Yi Guchen wanted to make a soft sword of the spiritual inscription weapon level, he had to do everything to the best of his ability. Naturally, he could not choose the spiritual inscriptions that were common on the streets. However, those rare spiritual inscriptions were extremely rare and not easy to find. Even if they appeared, they were expensive and even priceless. It seems that it is not easy to make a soft sword. Yi Guchen sighed slightly, but he was not discouraged. Senior, thank you for telling me. Yi Guchen cupped his hands slightly to the old drunkard and left. A few days later, the demon judge passed down an order through the blood order. The Crimson Mission had officially begun, and the first thing the participating assassins had to do was enter the Beichen Manor and lay low, waiting for the magistrate's next orders. Beichen Manor? Yi Guchen raised his eyes slightly. Apart from the St. Yuan Mansion, where the royal family resided, the other 9 mansions of the St. Yuan dynasty were occupied by various forces. In the Beichen Mansion, other than the Mansion Master's faction, there were only 2 other major factions. The 2 super families were the Morong family and the Situ family. Could it be that the target this time is to make a move against the super aristocratic families? Yi Guchen thought to himself. The foundation of the super families was even more profound than the 5 big families of the Sky River Prefecture. Within their families, there was more than one life and death chamber warrior. However, this wasn't something Yi Guchen needed to worry about right now. After packing up, he set off for Beichen Mansion. The Beichen Mansion was about the same size as the Sky River Prefecture. After a few days of hurrying, Yi Guchen arrived at a bustling city within the Beichen Mansion on Bei City. The reason why Yi Guchen didn't choose a secluded city to lay low was because he wanted to search for information regarding the mysterious silver heavy water, the heavenly flame, and the spiritual seal. The Beichen Mansion was vast, and its resources weren't any weaker than the Sky River Prefecture. Therefore, Yi Guchen wanted to try his luck. In every big city, there was no lack of people selling information. Soon, after paying the price of dozens of crystal jades, Yi Guchen received some information. Recently, there were 3 major events happening in the Beichen Mansion. The first was the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. In the St. Yuan dynasty, there were several major neutral forces that didn't participate in the competition between forces. Heavenly Forging Pavilion was one of them, and Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce was another. The Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce had a strong foundation, and it was rumored that it had the shadow of the St. Yuan dynasty's imperial family behind it. Therefore, it developed like a fish in water in the St. Yuan dynasty. With the strength and foundation of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, the auctions they held were naturally not small affairs. In the past auctions, there was no lack of extremely rare martial arts, secret techniques, precious treasures, and so on. Therefore, the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction attracted a lot of attention. The second event was that the Sword-Seeking Steel was about to open again. The Sword-Seeking Steel was a place of opportunity in the Beichen Mansion. Yi Guchen was quite interested in the Sword-Seeking Steel, and he inquired about it a lot. It was rumored that the Sword-Seeking Steel was left behind by a mysterious sword Dao expert. Every year, at a specific time, it would erupt with a majestic sword chi. The sword cultivators who participated in the trial would have to withstand the sword chi as they approached the Sword-Seeking Steel. There were a total of 5 places around the Sword-Seeking Steel. If one could obtain a place, they would have the qualification to leave their name on the Sword-Seeking Steel. However, for many years, there were only a few people who could leave their name on the Sword-Seeking Steel. Those sword cultivators who were able to obtain a place were able to obtain different opportunities. It was rumored that there was once a sword cultivator who obtained a king-level sword art from the Sword-Seeking Steel. Although it was only a lower king-level sword art, it ignited the Sword-Seeking Steel's passion. Many experts coveted the Sword-Seeking Steel. There were even many warriors who were not sword cultivators who participated. This was because even if they obtained a sword art, they could sell it to others if they did not use it themselves. Not to mention, there were many other opportunities. Attracted by such an opportunity, some divine soul realm experts and even life and death hidden lattice experts came to participate. However, the higher the realm of the warriors, the stronger the sword pressure from the sword-seeking steel. After a round of screening, those experts were not as successful as ordinary warriors. Therefore, in recent years, the sword-seeking steel had gradually become a competition ground for many geniuses. After all, to be able to leave one's name on the sword-seeking steel was a supreme honor for any sword cultivator. The sword-seeking steel, huh? I can take a look. Yi Guchen's interest in the sword-seeking steel was growing. As for the third major event, it was the marriage between Morong Ditian of the Morong family and Situ Hongxue of the Situ family. Morong Ditian was not an ordinary person. He was a heaven's pride of the Morong family, the #1 heaven's pride of the Beichen mansion. He was ranked 5th on the St. Yuan heaven's pride list, and a grade 6 heaven's pride. Morong Ming, who Yi Guchen had met previously, was Morong Ditian's younger brother. He was only 20 years old, but his cultivation had already reached the 7th layer of the qi refining stage. He had also mastered many of the Morong family's sword arts. He could be said to be a famous heaven's pride in the St. Yuan dynasty. In addition to his tall and handsome appearance, he could be said to be the dream lover of many girls. As for Situ Hongxue, she was also a heaven's pride of the Situ family and ranked 7th on the St. Yuan heaven's pride list. However, compared to her strength, her appearance was more famous. Not only in the Beichen mansion, but even in the entire St. Yuan dynasty, Situ Hongshue's beauty could be ranked in the top 5. With such a family background, identity, strength, and appearance, Situ Hongxue was also the ideal partner in the hearts of countless men. The marriage between the two was like a golden boy and a jade girl. In the entire Beichen mansion, there was no small amount of discussion. As for the wedding banquet, it was set to be held half a month later. It seems like the Beichen mansion will not be peaceful during this period of time. Yi Guchen faintly sensed that a storm was about to come. However, he was not worried. What he needed to do now was to participate in the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction and see if he could obtain the materials needed to forge a flexible sword. Chapter 43. The Divine Capital was one of the core cities of the Beichen mansion. It was also the location of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. In the core area of the Divine Capital, there was a majestic 9-story pavilion. This was the auction house of the Divine Capital's Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce. The Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction was in one day. At this moment, the auction house was abnormally lively. Many cultivators had already entered early to occupy good seats. Of course, the most important seats had already been reserved by many big shots. Even if you had crystal jades without any background, you could only sit at the back. I didn't expect to spend 400 crystal jades just to sit in this seat. Yi Guchen, who was wearing a bamboo hat, sat in a seat slightly closer to the center of the auction stage. And this seat still required another 400 crystal jades. Although Yi Guchen had more than 10,000 crystal jades, he couldn't afford such a consumption. I only hope to find what I want. Yi Guchen closed his eyes and rested, waiting for the auction to arrive. A day passed in the blink of an eye. The next day, the entire Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction house was like a bomb that had been ignited. Not only were there experts from the Beichen mansion, but there were also people from the neighboring mansions. Yi Guchen did not pay any attention to this. Suddenly, Yi Guchen sensed a familiar figure with his mind. It was a young girl in a yellow dress. She had bright eyes and white teeth. Her figure was elegant, like a lotus flower that had just emerged from the water. It's her. Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows. The young girl in the yellow dress was Situ Ling, the girl who had fought for the dragon blood transformation fruit in the Cloud Valley mountain range. The aura surging from Situ Ling's body had also reached the qi refining realm. Because of the Situ family's status, Situ Ling was only led to the core of the auction house by one of the Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce's people. "Oh, isn't this Miss Linger?" A somewhat frivolous voice sounded. The corners of Yi Guchen's mouth curled into a smile. He had met a familiar face again. A handsome young man in white nodded at Situ Ling with a faint smile on his face. It was Morong Ming. They are the geniuses of the Situ and Morong families. Morong Ditian and Situ Hongxue didn't come? How could they have the time? They're probably preparing for the wedding. No. I heard that they are recuperating and preparing to challenge the sword-seeking steel. Whispers sounded in the surroundings. Facing Morong Ming's warm smile, Sita Ling's face was cold. She snorted and turned around. Miss Ling, there is no need for you to regard me as an outsider. Not long from now, our two families will be as close as one family. Furthermore, what does Miss Ling think of me? If you don't mind, you and Miss Hong Shui can marry me and my elder brother. Morong Ming smiled very happily. Fletcher, big sister Hong Shui has never liked Morong Ditian. And you, aren't you thinking too highly of yourself? How many young ladies have been toyed with by you? Sita Ling shouted, her brows tightly knitted. Obviously, she loathed Morong Ming. Oh, is that so? But can you stop the marriage between our two families? Morong Ming's smile faded, and he sat on the other side. Facing the quarrel between the two, the surrounding people were as quiet as cicadas in winter. No one dared to say anything. At this moment, Yi Guchen's expression suddenly changed. His gaze turned to the entrance of the auction, because he felt the aura of a sword cultivator. A green-clothed young man with a jade-like face walked in casually. His figure was tall and straight like a pine tree. There was a long sword hanging on his waist. His hands were behind his back. However, there was a faint aura that attracted people's attention. That is the outstanding talent of the sword sect Pagoda Forest, Chu Qingqi. In the crowd, a small number of people recognized the green-clothed young man, and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Sword sect Pagoda Forest? Yi Guchen's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. The sword sect Pagoda Forest was not unfamiliar to many martial cultivators in the Saint Origin dynasty. In the Saint Origin dynasty, the forces on the surface were divided into 3 big sects and 4 big institutions. The 10 prefectures elite gathering was a grand event held for the 7 big sects to select outstanding disciples. The sword sect Pagoda Forest was one of the 4 big institutions. It was known as the sacred ground for sword cultivators. The reason why Yi Guchen knew a little about the sword sect Pagoda Forest was because he had once obtained the title of Young Sword Master in the Saint Origin dynasty. The title of sword sect seemed to be somewhat related to the sword sect Pagoda Forest. Chu Qingqi, I didn't expect you to be here too. Could it be that you're here for the sword seek steel? All of a sudden, a coarse and arrogant voice resounded like thunder. It was a red-clothed young man with the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He carried a heavy 9-orifice golden saber on his back and emitted a domineering aura. It's the disciples of the saber-conferred monarch palace. They're here too. The saber-conferred monarch palace? Yi Guchen was surprised. The saber-conferred monarch palace was also one of the 4 big institutions. If the sword sect Pagoda Forest was the sacred ground for sword cultivators, then the saber-conferred monarch palace was the heaven for saber cultivators. Moreover, the battle between saber and sword had been going on since ancient times. Therefore, the 2 institutions constantly had friction with each other. Usually, when the students of the 2 institutions met, it was inevitable for them to fight. Zhao Fengyang, you've entered the saber-conferred monarch palace for less than a year, but you've already entered the heavenly saber list. Chu Qingqi smiled faintly. The same goes for you. Aren't you also an outstanding talent in the sword sect Pagoda Forest? You must have come to the Beichen mansion to leave your name on the sword seek steel, right? Zhao Fengyang sneered. We're in the auction house of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce. Do you want to fight? Although the disciples of the Heavenly Saber list can't wait to trample the disciples of the sword sect Pagoda Forest under their feet, now isn't the time. Chu Qingqi shook his head indifferently in the face of Zhao Fengyang's tit-for-tat. There's no hurry. I'll have plenty of chances to defeat you. If I defeat you, I'm sure my ranking on the Heavenly Saber list will rise. Zhao Fengyang snorted coldly. Haha, I didn't expect this place to be so lively. A hearty laugh suddenly rang out. As this voice rang out, even Yi Guchen, who was hiding in the dark, frowned slightly. This was because he had sensed an extremely powerful sword chi. It was a young man in a black and white robe with the image of the sun and moon embroidered on his chest. He carried a long sword on his back and stood tall like an unsheathed sword. That image is the limitless sword sect. This time, the surrounding people exclaimed. It was even more shocking than the appearance of Chu Qingqi and Zhao Fengyang. This was because the young man in front of them was from the Limitless Sword sect, which was the strongest and had the strongest foundation among the 3 major sections. Although the 7 major forces of the Saint Origin dynasty kept each other in check, there was still a faint difference between them. Although this difference wasn't very big, the Limitless Sword sect was one of the top forces among the 7 major forces. Chapter 44. So it's senior brother Lu Tianying. Seeing that the people from the Limitless Sword sect had appeared, that Morong Ming suddenly spoke in a cordial manner. Oh, you know my name? You're a disciple of the Morong family? Asked the youth named Lu Tianying. I'm Morong Ming. Morong Ditian is my elder brother, Morong Ming said. Oh, so you're Morong Ditian's younger brother. Lu Tianying's expression softened. What's going on? Some people were puzzled. Don't you know? Although the 10 prefectures elite gathering hasn't been held yet, I heard that Morong Ditian has already been selected as a disciple of the Limitless Sword sect. With the Limitless Sword sect, and the marriage alliance with the Situ clan, the Morong family has become rich. Senior brother Lu Tianying, if you don't mind, please come and sit with me, said Morong Ming. Although the Morong family was a first-rate super family in the Beichen mansion, they were still insignificant when compared to the Limitless Sword sect. Ah! Lu Tianying waved his sleeve and didn't stand on ceremony. When they passed by Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying noticed Chu Qingqi's faintly furrowed brows, as well as the faint trace of loathing hidden in his eyes. If the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and the Sealed Saber Royal Palace were at loggerheads, then the Limitless Sword sect and the Limitless Sword sect were like fire and water. Are you qualified to leave your name on the sword-seeking steel this time? Lu Tianying muttered in a low voice. Chu Qingqi faintly smiled and shook his head. Xianhao might be qualified, but you? Then let's wait and see. Lu Tianying waved his sleeve. The surrounding cultivators were as quiet as cicadas in winter when they saw the 2 of them, with a strong smell of gunpowder. Yi Guchen was pondering in the dark. He knew that the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and the Limitless Sword sect seemed to have an unresolvable enmity. As time passed, almost all the people who came to participate in the auction had arrived. A woman in a tight red dress with a charming mature charm walked up to the auction stage while twisting her slender waist. I'm sure everyone is impatient from waiting. Fei Ji will not waste any more words and present the first auction item. Soon the first item was presented. It was a long saber, a supreme-grade spiritual weapon. Not everyone could own a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions, so the best spiritual weapon naturally became a hot commodity. Soon, this supreme-grade spirit weapon attracted many bids. However, regardless of whether it was Morong Ming, Sita Ling, Lu Tianying, Chu Qingqi, Zhao Fengyang, or the others, they all wore indifferent expressions. Clearly, with their status, supreme-grade spiritual artifacts were not very attractive to them. The next item to be auctioned is a Xiantian swordsmanship called the Heavenly Eagle Swordsmanship. It was created by an expert who had broken through the hidden latch of life and death and stepped onto the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. Although it's only a low-level Xiantian swordsmanship, once it's used, it's as powerful as a falcon swooping down on a rabbit. Xiantian sword techniques were not common. Even the 5 aristocratic families of the Milky Way province would treat Xiantian sword techniques as their core martial arts. I bid 2,000 crystal jades. You want to buy an innate sword technique with only 2,000 crystal jades? Why don't you go rob a bank? I'll pay you 4,000 crystal jades. Although it was only a low-level Xiantian swordsmanship, the Heavenly Eagle swordsmanship still attracted a lot of competition. Only the young talents of the major forces looked on coldly. A trace of disdain flashed in Lu Tianying's eyes. Obviously, this swordsmanship was only common in the Limitless Sword sect. In the end, the Heavenly Shadow swordsmanship was obtained by the leader of a small force. He could take it back and use it as his core martial arts. Following that, the atmosphere of the auction was still very lively. However, Yi Guchen just sat there indifferently. He did not have much capital, so he would not compete for things that he did not particularly need. As for the people from the other major powers, They also did not speak much. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item to be auctioned is a treasure herb. Fei Ji clapped her jade-like hands, and a pretty maid came in carrying a tray. She lifted the cloth and a fiery red fruit that resembled a dragon fruit appeared in front of everyone's eyes. This is the asparagus fruit? Someone whispered in surprise. Yes, it's the asparagus fruit. As everyone knows, the asparagus fruit is a treasure herb that strengthens muscles and bones, and replenishes vital energy and blood. If taken in the body refining realm, it can lay a strong physical foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please consider carefully for your juniors. Fei Ji covered her mouth and smiled. The starting price of the asparagus fruit was 2,000 crystal jades, which made many people frown. Although the asparagus fruit was a treasure herb that could replenish vital energy and blood, it did not have much effect on these Qi refining realm and divine soul realm experts. Although the physical body was important, after entering the Qi refining realm, one could use true Qi to cleanse the body. Although it could not be compared to a martial cultivator, who focused on refining the body, it was not much worse. As for the use of their own juniors, many forces had some similar spiritual herbs. Although the effect might not be as good as the asparagus fruit, it was enough. Therefore, the asparagus fruit with a starting price of 2,000 crystal jades was not popular. On the auction stage, Fei Ji saw this and seemed to have expected it. Although the asparagus fruit was rarer than the spiritual herbs, its effect was somewhat useless. Naturally, the enthusiasm of the auction was greatly reduced. However, although the asparagus fruit was not useful to most people, Yi Guchen's eyes lit up slightly. The asparagus fruit had the effect of replenishing vital energy and strengthening muscles and bones. Naturally, it also had the effect of repairing tendons and veins. After receiving the 100 veins blood ginseng from Xuansu, his sword vein had been restored to 36 sword veins. If he could get the asparagus fruit, Yi Guchen was confident that the recovery speed of his sword vein would greatly increase. If he could repair his sword vein as soon as possible and cultivate the first volume of the Universal Sword Codex to the advanced level, Yi Guchen would be qualified to cultivate the second volume of the Universal Sword Codex. That was a real king-level cultivation method. 2,200 crystal jades. Yi Guchen lowered his voice and said casually. Seeing that someone had bid, the crowd shifted their gaze. Yi Guchen was wearing a bamboo hat and a black robe, sitting on the side. He was very inconspicuous. 2,400 crystal jades. Someone bid. Although the asparagus fruit's effect was somewhat useless to most people, there were indeed some people who wanted to give it to outstanding juniors. In response, Yi Guchen just smiled and continued to bid. In the end, Yi Guchen won the asparagus fruit at the price of 3,400 crystal jades. The people from the other major forces, including Murong Ming and Sitaling, did not bid. This was because there was no lack of asparagus fruit among these forces that could temper one's vital energy. Is everyone feeling a little bored? I'm sure the vast majority of you will be interested in the next treasure. Fei Ji giggled. Accompanied by Fei Ji's laughter, another treasure was brought to the auction stage. That is, many people shifted their gazes. Under the bamboo hat, Yi Guchen's eyes also flashed with a glimmer of light. Chapter 45. Mysterious Silver Heavy Water. Looking at the liquid that was as viscous as mercury in the container, Yi Guchen's attention was focused on it. Without a doubt, this was one of the 3 rarest treasures that Yi Guchen needed to forge the soft sword, the mysterious silver heavy water. Everyone, I believe you have heard of this mysterious silver heavy water. It is a rare material for forging spirit inscription divine weapons. It can transform between a solid and liquid state. If you add a few drops of mysterious silver heavy water into a spirit artifact, it can make the spirit artifact flawless. Fei Ji said with a smile. The mysterious silver heavy water was not like the asparagus fruit from before. It was useful to almost all martial cultivators. After all, who didn't want to have a handy and powerful weapon? Looking at the auction house that was once again in high spirits, Yi Guchen's brows were somewhat solemn. Obviously, it would be much more difficult to obtain the mysterious silver heavy water than the asparagus fruit. The heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce was very smart. The mysterious silver heavy water was auctioned in drops, and the starting price of a drop was as high as 1,000 crystal jades. I bid 1,200. I bid 1,500. The price of the mysterious silver heavy water continued to rise. Suddenly, the white-haired old man stood up and said indifferently, I bid 2,500 crystal jades. Everyone, give this old man some face. It's Master Gu. Master Gu is a 3-star blacksmith. He is highly respected in the entire Beichin mansion. I heard that he is also a guest of the Heavenly Forging Pavilion. Seeing Master Gu make a bid, the surrounding voices instantly quieted down. Even Lu Tianying and the others did not speak. After all, offending a blacksmith was not a good thing. Just as Master Gu was about to buy a few drops of the mysterious silver heavy water, a lazy voice suddenly said, 50,000 crystal jades. I want all of the mysterious silver heavy water. This voice did not sound loud, and even had a trace of immaturity, but everyone, including Yi Guchen, turned their gazes to the source of the voice. When he saw the figure, even Yi Guchen was slightly stunned. It was just a little fatty who looked to be 16 or 17 years old. He was white and chubby, wearing a golden robe, and had a somewhat rich appearance. However, there was a sword hanging from his waist, which looked rather out of place with his figure. Which family does this brat come from? He's clearly a hothead. A few people sneered. They clearly felt that this little fatty didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Humph, I don't know which family you are from. Haven't you heard of this old man's name? Master Gu looked displeased. A half-grown brat also came to ruin his good thing. Who are you? Little fatty dug his ears with his little finger, looking confused. You. Master Gu was so angry that his face turned into the color of a pig's liver. There was anger in his eyes. Can we bid now? Little fatty directly ignored Master Gu and asked Fergie on the stage. Oh, okay. Fei Ji was also stunned for a moment before she hurriedly nodded. Although the little fatty won the mysterious silver heavy water, the surrounding people looked at him with pity. With Master Gu's reputation as a 3-star blacksmith, there were many people who wanted to help him vent his anger. Yi Guchen frowned. He didn't expect that the little fatty would actually win all the mysterious silver heavy water. Now, it wouldn't be easy to find more mysterious silver heavy water. Yi Guchen wouldn't give up so easily. After the auction, it was obvious that this little fatty wouldn't be able to get away so easily. That would be Yi Guchen's opportunity. He wasn't a pedantic person. Sometimes, in order to obtain something, it was necessary to use some other means. Otherwise, Yi Guchen wouldn't have become an assassin of the bloodthirsty tower for the Shura sword intent. After the mysterious silver heavy water, some auction items were displayed one after another. Some caused fierce competition, while others were mediocre. Yi Guchen was lucky. He won some materials to forge a flexible sword. Although they weren't the 3 most difficult materials to find, they still saved Yi Guchen a lot of effort. Of course, on the other hand, Yi Guchen only had about 5,000 crystal jades left in his origin ring. After that, another auction item aroused great enthusiasm. Even Lu Tianying, Chu Qingqi, Zhao Fengyang, and the others started to bid. The auction item was a secret technique, called the Qi Explosion Secret Technique. As the name implied, the Qi Explosion Secret Technique was a secret technique that targeted Qi. When using this secret technique, one could compress their Qi to the extreme at will, and then explode with several times the power. What was even more terrifying was that the compressed Qi from the Qi Explosion Secret Technique could be attached to various spiritual weapons. Regardless of whether it was sword Qi or saber Qi, they could all explode with greater power. This was also why people like Lu Tianying were so interested in the Qi Explosion Secret Technique. However, this Qi Explosion Secret Technique wasn't very attractive to Yi Guchen. Firstly, he didn't have any crystal jades to compete for it. Secondly, this Qi Explosion Secret Technique seemed a little useless to Yi Guchen, who had the sword vein. However, Yi Guchen was weighing the price. If he took out the spirit-devouring secret technique to auction, he didn't know how much it would fetch. However, it would probably be far more valuable than the Qi Explosion Secret Technique, because the spirit-devouring secret technique could improve a warrior's realm in a short time. This kind of secret technique had always been rare and precious. However, Yi Guqin was just thinking about it. It was impossible for him to take out the spirit-devouring secret technique to auction. In the end, the Qi explosion secret technique was won by Lu Tianying, who had a strong background. Morong Ming even sponsored Lu Tianying with a lot of crystal jades, so the relationship between them was much more harmonious. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is the last auction item of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. It's a spirit-level martial skill. As Fei Ji's words fell, the entire auction house was in an uproar. Previously, a Xiantian sword technique had attracted a lot of competition. Now there was a spirit-level martial skill, which would definitely cause everyone to go crazy. This was because unlike treasures, elixirs, and so on, martial skills could be passed down. In particular, some big forces needed some powerful and rare martial skills as their core. Generally speaking, only the 7 major forces could possess spirit-level martial skills. Even for Yi Guqin, it was a coincidence that he possessed 2 spiritual-level sword principles. One was passed down to him by his father, and the other was obtained in the 18-blood prison. However, for ordinary warriors, it was already very rare to be able to practice Xiantian martial skills. As for spirit-level martial skills, unless one joined the 7 major forces, it was almost impossible to come into contact with them. Even if one joined the 7 major forces, it would probably take a lot of effort to learn spirit-level martial skills. This showed how rare spirit-level martial skills were. I wonder what kind of martial skill this is. Is it swordsmanship? Yi Guqin thought to himself. Yi Guqin was not in a hurry to learn swordsmanship. He had not practiced the 2 spirit-level sword techniques to perfection, so he was not in a hurry to obtain new swordsmanship. Ladies and gentlemen, Fei Ji wants to tell you that this is not only a spirit-level martial skill, but also an extremely rare defensive martial skill, called the protection of heaven. As Fei Ji's words fell, the entire auction house seemed to be dead silent for a moment. In this dead silence, everyone seemed to be breathing heavily. Chapter 46. Not only was it a spiritual-level martial art, but it was also a spiritual-level defensive martial art. Under normal circumstances, defensive martial arts were less valuable than offensive martial arts, so the value of a defensive martial art was higher than an offensive martial art of the same level. Moreover, this was not an ordinary defensive martial art, but a spiritual-level defensive martial art. Its value was a little shocking. Even among the 7 major forces, spiritual-level defensive martial arts were rare. This is it. As long as I get this spiritual-level defensive martial art, no one among the elites of the Limitless Sword sect will be a match for me, except for Xian Hao and a few others. Lu Tianying stared at the auction stage with burning eyes. The reason he had participated in this auction was because of the all-heaven protection. However, it was obvious that he was not the only one who wanted the protection of all heaven. Chu Qingqi of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, and Zhao Fengyang of the Saber-Conferred King's Palace, both stared at the scroll that recorded the protection of all heaven. It's actually a spiritual-level defensive martial art. With my current physical body, the Vajra celestial body, and the protection of all heaven, I'm afraid that even an ordinary Qi refinement stage grandmaster won't be able to cause any harm to me, Yi Guqin thought to himself. However, he knew that it was impossible for him to get the protection of all heaven with his financial resources. Even if he got it, it would cause endless trouble. Sure enough, after the protection of all heaven was auctioned, the first to stand up and bid was Lu Tianying. The starting price of the protection of all heaven was as high as 20,000 crystal jades, and the final price was obviously far more than that. 25,000 crystal jades. Everyone, I am Lu Tianying of the Limitless Sword sect. Please give me some face. Lu Tianying looked around and said. Perhaps his own strength was not considered to be at the top here, but the background of the Limitless Sword sect caused many people who wanted to speak to be at a loss for words. Even Fei Ji could only smile bitterly when she saw this scene. Although there seemed to be a hint of cheating, She could not say anything since the Limitless Sword sect had a background. 28,000 crystal jades. Almost as soon as Lu Tianying's voice fell, another voice sounded. It was Chu Qingqi of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Chu Qingqi, do you really want to go against me? Lu Tianying narrowed his eyes, a dangerous glint flickering in them. Isn't it the duty of the disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest to oppose the disciples of the Limitless Sword Sect? Chu Qingqi smiled faintly with a calm expression. Heh, your Sword Sect's talent has been suppressed by my Limitless Sword Sect all these years. Do you still have the courage to go against me? Lu Tianying sneered and bit again. Haha, I also want such a defensive martial art. Zhao Fengyang interjected. The fighting style of a saber cultivator had always been bold and unrestrained. Therefore, it was quite necessary for him to cultivate a defensive martial art. The following bids were basically a game between the three great forces. The price of the Protector of All Heaven continued to rise. In the end it reached more than 50,000 crystal jades. Morong Ming, lend me all your crystal jades. In the future, I will guarantee that you will enter the Limitless Sword Sect. Lu Tianying's eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that he would not give up until he achieved his goal. Really? Thank you very much, Senior Brother Lu. Facing Lu Tianying's robbery, Morong Ming was happy instead of angry. He was born in a super family and did not cherish crystal jades. However, the quota to enter the Limitless Sword Sect could not be bought with crystal jades. Moreover, his talent and strength were far inferior to his brother Morong Ditian. It was impossible for the Limitless Sword Sect to take a fancy to him. Only by using this method would he have a chance to enter the Limitless Sword Sect. 70,000 crystal jades. Lu Tianying's tone was extremely cold, and his gaze was extremely sharp. Chu Qingqi and Zhao Fengyang both frowned. This price had already slightly exceeded their limit. Although Chu Qingqi did not want him to obtain the Protector of All Heaven, he really could not take out more crystal jades. 70,000 crystal jades going once. 70,000 crystal jades going twice. Just as the smile on Lu Tianying's face widened slightly, and he was waiting for Fei Ji to finish her words, a voice that seemed to be asking for a beating sounded again. 100,000 crystal jades. This young master wants it. Once this was said, there was an uproar. Everyone looked over. Sure enough, it was that fat white boy again. Previously, he had used 50,000 crystal jades to bid for the mysterious silver heavy water, which had greatly angered Master Gu. Now, he actually opened his mouth to bid again. However, it was clear that the price that the little fatty quoted still shocked these people. Where are you from? Don't tell me you don't know about my Limitless Sword Sect? The veins on Lu Tianying's forehead were faintly throbbing as he tried to suppress the anger in his tone. But from his cold gaze, it could be seen that he was really angry. Limitless Sword Sect. What the hell is that place? The little fatty looked confused. No one knew if he was angry at Lu Tianying, or if he really did not know about the Limitless Sword Sect. Is this kid not from the Saint Origin dynasty? Otherwise, how could he not know about the Limitless Sword Sect? Some people were dumbfounded. Good, very good. Lu Tianying said the word good 3 times in a row. Obviously, he was so angry that his internal organs were burning. With his identity, not to mention the outside world, even among the elite disciples of the huge Limitless Sword Sect, he was considered to be in the upper echelon. When had he ever been ignored like this? The people around looked at the little fatty no longer with sympathy and pity, but as if they were looking at a dead person. After offending several big shots in a row, the little fatty, regardless of his identity, would probably end up in a miserable state. In the end, the auction of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce ended in such a dramatic situation. In the end, the real winner was not the people from the big forces, but the little fatty who looked somewhat lucky. Looking at the little fatty, for some reason, Yi Guchen faintly felt that something was wrong. This was because he felt an extremely strong sword essence from the little fatty. However, the state of the sword essence was very strange, as if it was deliberately sealed by someone. If it was an ordinary person, they might almost ignore it. However, it was difficult to hide from the perception of the sword demon, who had been immersed in the sword principle for many years. But what made Yi Guqin puzzled was that he deliberately felt that the little fatty did not know any sword principle, nor was he a sword principle genius. This was inconceivable. Just as Yi Guqin was thinking, the whole auction also came to an end. However, almost everyone's eyes fell on the little fatty. In the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, even Lu Tianying and the others could not directly make a move. After all, the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce seemed to have the shadow of the Saint Origin dynasty's imperial family behind it. Although the Limitless Sword sect was not particularly afraid of the imperial family, they still had to give them face. However, the little fatty, who was in the eye of the storm, seemed to be naive and ignorant of everything. He directly walked out of the door of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce without a care in the world. Just as the little fatty took a few steps out of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, a slightly indifferent voice sounded. "Do you still want to leave?" Chapter 47. Lu Tianying's expression was indifferent, but there was a hint of ruthlessness hidden in his pitch-black eyes. Even in the Limitless Sword sect, Lu Tianying was like a moon surrounded by stars. Now he was actually provoked by an unknown fat boy. How could he swallow this anger? Lu Tianying wasn't the only one. On the other side, the 3-star blacksmith, Master Gu, also came forward. He was accompanied by several experts. One of them had an aura that made Yi Guqin, who was hiding in the dark, slightly tremble. A spirit expert? Yi Guqin was speechless. A 3-star blacksmith's appeal was indeed strong. He could even order a spirit expert around. "Boy, you took my mysterious silver heavy water. Do you still think you can run away?" Grandmaster Gu's expression was similarly cold. He was also a person of noble status, and had never suffered such humiliation. However, in the face of such a lineup, the little fatty put one hand on his waist, and pointed at Lu Tianying, and the others with the other. He then flipped his hand and beckoned with his finger. "Come here." The surrounding cultivators were all stunned by the little fatty's provocation. This boy is too careless. Does he not know what kind of situation he is in? Good boy. Grandmaster Gu's face flushed red as he pointed at the little fatty. The spirit expert beside him suddenly attacked. A powerful spiritual pressure poured out, causing the surrounding crowd to continuously step back. This was the power of a spirit expert. After opening the knowledge sea, the spirit pressure alone was not something an ordinary chi refining grandmaster could resist. At the same time, Lu Tianying also erupted with his strength. Although he had yet to reach the spirit stage, he had already reached the 8th cycle of the chi refining stage. Such strength was already considered in the upper echelons of the younger generation of the 7 great forces of the Saint Origin dynasty. Yi Guqin knew that the heaven prides of the 7 great forces would not be listed on the Heaven's Pride list. Most of the people on the list had never joined the 7 great forces. However, this did not mean that the Heaven's Pride list was worthless. In fact, some of the heaven prides of the 7 great forces, such as Xian Hao of the Limitless Sword sect, were once ranked 5th on the Heaven's Pride list. Another example was Yu Shicho of the Tingxue Tower. He was ranked 4th on the Heaven Pride list, but his strength was no weaker than the other heaven prides of the 7 great factions. Facing a divine soul realm expert and an elite disciple of the Limitless Sword sect, the little fatty stuck out his little belly and emitted an obscure wave of sword intent. This wave of sword intent wasn't very obvious, but it was like a mountain, causing the air to freeze. Could it be that this kid really has some skills? Looking at the little fatty, whose expression would not change even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of him, the spectating cultivators could not help but mutter, you're just playing tricks." Lu Tianying immediately attacked. Using his finger as a sword, the 8th cycle chi refinement realm's vigorous genuine chi gushed out and turned into a sharp sword light at the tip of his finger as he attacked the little fatty. It was the Limitless Sword sect's Xiantian finger art, one sword finger. At the same time, the Divine Soul Realm expert made his move. Although he wasn't from one of the 7 major powers, his strength was there for all to see. His means were also extremely powerful. Under the control of his soul strength, His majestic true chi transformed into a giant true chi hand and pressed down on the little fatty. With this method, he could suppress an ordinary chi refinement realm grandmaster with a flip of his hand. This was a method that only experts above the divine soul realm could use, genuine chi condensation. Using soul strength to control genuine chi to condense into various forms. Under the pressure of these two ultimate moves, the little fatty's expression remained unchanged. The spectating cultivators all retreated dozens of feet away, for fear of being affected. You think you can deal with me with such a trivial method? The little fatty raised his head. Just when Yi Guchen thought that he would use the obscure sword intent, several golden lights suddenly flashed under the little fatty's feet. However, in the next moment, the little fatty disappeared from where he stood. That's right, he disappeared. No. Yi Guchen's gaze suddenly turned. Dozens of feet away, a figure suddenly appeared. It was the little fatty. So fast. A hint of surprise flashed in Yi Guchen's eyes. That speed was something that even some rare movement techniques could not achieve. Could it be a secret technique? Yi Guchen guessed. Boom! On the other side, both of their moves missed. Lu Tianying and the Divine Soul Realm expert were stunned for a moment before they saw the little fatty, who was dozens of feet away. How is this possible? Lu Tianying and the others were stunned. Soon after, a trace of astonishment crept onto their faces. Even they were shocked by the little fatty's ability to travel through the void. Do you really want me to use my trump card? Do you think you can catch me? The little fatty was very smug. With a despicable smile on his face, Lu Tianying and the Divine Soul Realm expert were enraged and charged forward again. However, the little fatty was like walking a dog. With his miraculous method, he played Lu Tianying and the others in circles. Boy, don't run if you have the guts. Even the Divine Soul Realm expert was a little angry out of humiliation. Sigh, this is boring. I'm going. The little fatty patted his butt inside. The next moment his figure blurred. In a few breaths, he appeared thousands of feet away, looking at the little fatty who calmly left, and then at Lu Tianying whose eyes were bloodshot. The surrounding warriors sighed. At the same time, they were secretly surprised by the little fatty's origin. Some said that he was a god-favored son of a hidden force. Some said that he was an outsider of the Saint Origin dynasty. Yi Guchen was also a little curious about the little fatty. Of course, he was curious about the obscure sword essence in his body. However, the little fatty also had the mysterious silver heavy water. It was obviously more troublesome to find other mysterious silver heavy water. I can only take one step at a time. Yi Guchen did not force him. He just let nature take its course. After the auction of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, the most eye-catching thing was naturally the sword-seeking steel. It was a grand event for sword practitioners. The sword-seeking steel was located in the Great Wild Forest, north of the Beichen Mansion. There was a sky sword peak in the Great Wild Forest, and the sword-seeking steel was located on the peak. However, not to mention whether it could withstand the sword chi pressure of the sword-seeking steel, the Great Wild Forest alone was enough to stop many geniuses. The Sky Sword Peak was located in the core of the Great Wild Forest. In that area, there were rank 4 or rank 5 demonic beasts. In the past, there were also some unlucky geniuses who were killed before they could even climb the Sky Sword Peak. Therefore, the Great Wild Forest was like a sieve that sifted through those who were both good and bad. Only the real geniuses were qualified to climb the Sky Sword Peak. After a few days, Yi Guchen came to a capital city called Desolation City, which was close to the Great Wild Forest. Because the sword-seeking steel was about to open, Desolation City was extremely popular. Many geniuses gathered together, and it was very lively. At the same time, there was no lack of friction and disputes. Blood fighting rings could be seen everywhere in Desolation City. The blood fighting rings were engraved with formation restrictions. If someone wanted to fight, they had to go up to the blood fighting ring. On the blood fighting ring, no one cared about life or death. When Yi Guchen entered Desolation City, he saw many people fighting on the blood fighting ring. There was no lack of genius disciples from some forces. They were all young and aggressive people with extraordinary talent. Naturally, no one was willing to submit to the other. Chapter 48. Yi Guchen was not interested in it, nor was he in the mood to compete with others. He found a remote inn, and prepared to refine the asparagus fruit. The geniuses who could participate in the sword-seeking steal all had their own trump cards, so Yi Guchen had to be fully prepared. The asparagus fruit was a rare medicine, more precious than the 100 veins blood ginseng. Its effect was far superior to that of the 100 veins blood ginseng. When Yi Guchen refined the asparagus fruit into his body, he felt a vigorous medicinal power flowing along his tendons and meridians. Wherever it passed, his tendons and meridians shone brightly, as if they were plated with a layer of brilliance. At the same time, the damaged sword vein in Yi Guchen's body began to repair at an amazing speed. The asparagus fruit was far more effective than the 100 veins blood ginseng. Soon 1-2-3, Yi Guchen's sword vein was recovering rapidly, and his aura became stronger. The asparagus fruit was not only good for repairing tendons and meridians, but also a great tonic. His qi and blood roared in his body, and his aura rose again. The profound qi in his body surged like a tide. Boom! Yi Guchen seemed to have turned into a big bell, constantly roaring. Fortunately, this place was remote, otherwise, it would have attracted a lot of attention. When Yi Guchen's aura reached a critical point, it was like a volcano that had been building up for a long time, and was about to erupt. A strong profound qi aura spread out, and Yi Guchen successfully advanced to the 9th level of the essence realm. He was only one step away from the qi refining realm, but this distance of one step trapped many martial artists. However, Yi Guchen was not worried. It was certain that he would break through to the qi refining realm. In fact, with Yi Guchen's talent, he could indeed break through to the qi refining realm quickly. But he still needed some time to accumulate. He had to completely pass the third blood tribulation of the human body and achieve a perfect body before he could break through. Once he broke through, it would be amazing. Yi Guchen couldn't imagine how strong it would be to break through to the qi refining realm with a perfect body, but it would definitely give him a pleasant surprise. Yi Guchen was an ambitious person. Whether it was in terms of sword Dao or cultivation, he wanted to achieve perfection. After breaking through to the 9th level of the essence stage, Yi Guchen's sword vein had almost fully recovered. At this moment, the 108 sword veins on the surface of Yi Guchen's body emitted a lustrous light, as bright as the stars in the sky. However, within this lustrous light, there was an extremely strong power hidden. With the help of the asparagus fruit, Yi Guchen finally repaired the 108 sword veins that Gu Xiaoyang had destroyed. Next, Yi Guchen's goal was to cultivate the first volume of the Universal Sword Codex to the greater success stage, which was the major circulation of 360 sword veins. With the breakthrough in cultivation and the restoration of the sword veins, Yi Guchen was itching to test his strength. He quietly left the inn and came to an even more desolate corner area. After taking a few steps, he saw a lush forest not far in front of him. There was a huge rock in the forest that was 6 meters tall. It was even taller than the surrounding trees. This huge rock was densely covered with sword marks. Oh, it's the sword testing rock. Yi Guchen was familiar with it. Many sword cultivators would practice their swordsmanship against the rock. In his previous life, the sword demon practiced his swordsmanship against the rock in a cave on the peak of a mountain. He even left his unique skill, the 9 swords of Dugu, on the rock for future generations to practice. Yi Guchen slowly approached the sword-testing rock and found that it was completely black. It's actually basalt, Yi Guchen thought to himself. Although basalt was not a particularly precious, or it was not common either. It was also very expensive. Such a huge piece of basalt was worth at least 7,000 to 8,000 crystal jades. The owner of this sword-testing stone must be a figure from some big power to be able to make such a big move. Yi Guchen's gaze fell on the sword marks on the sword-testing rock again. Basalt was famous for its hardness. Ordinary spiritual weapons would not be able to leave a scratch on it. However, the sword marks on the sword-testing rock were 1 inch deep. One should not underestimate this 1 inch. To be able to leave a sword mark that was 1 inch deep on the basalt, it was enough to show that the swordsman had a strong foundation in swordsmanship. However, Yi Guchen frowned slightly. With the sword demon's understanding of swordsmanship, he could naturally tell that the swordsman was a woman. Because the sword mark's trajectory was ethereal and delicate, only a woman's soft waist could display such a sword path. Such a sword move was definitely comparable to some supreme talents. Moreover, it was one of the top supreme talents. The swordsman was a rare genius female swordsman. However, in Yi Guchen's eyes, such a sword move still had flaws. There are many sword marks on the sword testing rock. There are Xiantian swordsmanship and spirit-level swordsmanship. She must be a supreme talent from a powerful force. Unfortunately, Yi Guchen shook his head slightly. It was agile but lacking in inner strength. Originally, according to Yi Guchen's calculations, such a swordsmanship could actually be agile and elegant while containing inner strength, increasing actual combat and lethality. Yi Guchen focused on actual combat. Even the sword demon in his previous life focused on actual combat when he created the 9 Duga swords. Although the sword moves on the sword testing rock were quite good, in Yi Guchen's eyes, they were a little showy and impractical. It's a rare swordsman. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly. He actually had a tinge of appreciation for talent. Among women there were very few sword cultivators. Most of the time, there was only 1 in 10,000. Yi Guchen's primordial ring flashed, and the calamity dust sword appeared in his hand. He did not activate his vessel meridian, nor did he activate any spiritual inscriptions. He simply drew his sword. Moreover, the swordsmanship was the most ordinary piercing moon swordsmanship. After the breakthrough in his cultivation and the restoration of his sword meridian, Yi Guchen felt that his swordsmanship was smoother, and his thoughts were clearer. The piercing moon swordsmanship was the most ordinary swordsmanship. It was not even graded. Some swordsmen would not even bother to cultivate such a swordsmanship. However, to Yi Guchen, although there were grades in swordsmanship, there was no difference in quality. The true swordsmanship was the return of all swords. This was also thanks to the enlightenment of the sword demon, Duga Wu Bai. As the swordsmanship was executed, streaks of sword light were like illusions. They exploded with dazzling sparks on the sword testing rock, leaving behind sword marks. Every sword mark was 3 inches deep. This was the result of Yi Guchen not activating the power of the calamity dust sword, and not using any spirit-level swordsmanship. After using the sword for a while, Yi Guchen withdrew his sword and panted slightly. Because he had activated all the qi and blood in his body to practice the sword, it was the most exhausting. But the harvest was also great. Piercing moon swordsmanship, although it is the simplest and most ordinary, it is not simple. However, I have finally cultivated it to perfection. Yi Guchen muttered to himself. He had cultivated the piercing moon swordsmanship to perfection. Chapter 49. Beginner level, higher level, basic level, profound level, perfect fusion and martial realm. Any martial arts technique was inseparable from these 6 realms. The higher the level of cultivation, the greater the power of the martial arts technique. However, the higher the level of the 6 realms, the harder it was to cultivate. Beginner level could be reached in a few months, or even a few weeks. But it might take more than a year to reach the higher level, and several years to reach the small level. After that, it was almost impossible to reach the profound level, perfect fusion, and martial realm without special opportunities or comprehension. Now, Yi Guchen had cultivated the piercing moon swordsmanship to the perfect fusion realm. This realm meant that Yi Guchen's comprehension of the piercing moon swordsmanship had reached the peak. It was a qualitative change, and the power of the swordsmanship would be multiplied. Even if it was an ungraded piercing moon swordsmanship, its power would be unparalleled when cultivated to this realm. After cultivating to the perfect fusion realm, the next level is the last martial arts realm, the martial realm. If I can cultivate to the martial realm, I can reach a higher level and comprehend the ultimate move of the piercing moon swordsmanship. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. Now he had mastered the unique move of the piercing moon swordsmanship, meteor piercing moon, and the ultimate move moonfall. Above that, he could only comprehend the ultimate move after cultivating to the martial realm. If he could perform the ultimate move of the piercing moon swordsmanship, Its power would be extraordinary. Yi Guqin was looking forward to it. But he knew that the reason why he could cultivate the swordsmanship to the perfect fusion realm was because the level of the piercing moon swordsmanship was too low, although the talent of the sword demon played a part. If it were a spiritual level swordsmanship, it would be difficult to comprehend it to the perfect fusion realm. For example, Yi Guqin was still short of a chance to cultivate the boundless heaven swordsmanship to the basic level. However, this was already not bad. It should be known that ordinary geniuses would need several years, or even longer to cultivate a spirit-level sword art to a higher level. But Yi Guqin, who had the soul of the sword demon, had only cultivated for a few months. This showed that Duge Wubai was indeed worthy of being one of the strongest sword principle experts in the underworld. If I can cultivate the sword heart in the Universal Sword Codex, with my talent, it won't be too difficult to comprehend the swordsmanship, Yi Guqin thought. The first part of the Myriad Sword Codex cultivated the sword vein, while the second part refined the heart of the sword. Yi Guqin was curious about the sword heart. After practicing on the sword testing stone, Yi Guqin did not stay and left directly. It might be impolite to use someone else's sword testing stone, but Yi Guqin believed that if the owner of the sword testing stone saw this, he would not be angry. Yi Guqin had left for about 2 hours. Suddenly, a beautiful figure arrived on the waves. The beauty was a beautiful lady in her 20s. She was in a snow-colored silk dress, and her figure was elegant and beautiful. Her black hair was like clouds, and her face was as bright as the moon. Her delicate eyebrows were as beautiful as a painting. Her neck was as beautiful as a swan's, and her collarbone was slightly exposed. Her breasts were full, and her waist was slender. Although her legs were covered by the silk dress, they couldn't hide her long and slender figure. In the beauty's slender hand, she was holding a sword that was slender and slender. The sword was like her, and she was like her sword. They were both beautiful. As long as she stood there, the surrounding heaven and earth seemed to radiate brilliance. This beauty held her sword and stood in front of the sword-testing rock. Just as she was about to start practicing, her delicate body suddenly stiffened. That beautiful and exquisite face that made it hard for people to shift their gazes also seemed to have frozen. "Sister Hong Shui, what's wrong?" A young lady in a yellow dress walked over. Seeing that the beauty didn't move, she asked. If Yi Guqin was here, he wouldn't be unfamiliar with this young lady. She was Situ Ling, whom he had met a few times before. This beautiful lady in a silk dress was naturally the pearl of the Situ family. Her appearance was famous in the Saint Origin dynasty. Situ Hongxue. How is this possible? Situ Hongxue didn't seem to hear Situ Ling's voice. Her starry eyes were absent-minded as she stared at the sword mark on the sword test rock. What's wrong? Situ Ling also looked at the sword test rock. How is this possible? My sword path has been completely broken. Not only the Xiantian sword technique, but also the Four Seasons sword technique. Situ Hongxue was in disbelief. The Four Seasons sword technique was one of the Situ family's spirit sword techniques. It had the vitality of spring, the blazing of summer, the chilling of autumn, and the biting cold of winter. The sword technique changed between the 4 seasons. It was extremely powerful, and it wasn't any weaker than the Morong family's mysterious heaven sword technique. However, such a powerful 4 seasons sword technique had actually been countered. Furthermore, it had been countered by the simplest sword technique. This sword technique can't be wrong. The piercing moon sword technique. Situ Hongxue was dumbfounded. Although she didn't practice the piercing moon sword technique, she had seen others practice it before. Naturally, she knew that the 3-inch deep sword mark was left behind by the piercing moon sword technique. Sister Hongxue, this could it be? Although Situ Ling didn't practice the sword technique, she still saw some clues. Is this returning to one's natural state? Using the inferior piercing moon sword technique to break the 4 seasons sword technique? Although it's only on the sword test rock. Situ Hongxue frowned. She was like a little girl holding her heart. However, this person didn't have any other intentions. He just pointed out some of the flaws in the 4 seasons sword technique. Situ Hongxue was a little absent-minded as she muttered to herself. She was a proud daughter of the heavens since she was young. She was the beloved daughter of the Situ clan. Moreover, in the path of sword cultivation, although she wasn't extremely talented, she was still one of the best. In Situ Hongshua's eyes, the 4-season sword technique that she practiced was already close to perfection. Moreover, she had practiced it to the peak of a higher level, and was not even close to a small success. However, on the sword test rock, the piercing moon sword technique had pointed out many flaws in the 4-season sword technique that she had used. In other words, if these flaws were known by someone in actual combat, and then targeted, the power of Situ Hongshua's 4-season sword technique would be greatly reduced. Moreover, the opponent might even find the flaws and break the 4-season sword technique in one go. Who is it? Who is it? Situ Hongshua thought to herself. Could it be him? Murong. No, it shouldn't be possible. He definitely wouldn't practice the piercing moon sword technique. That heroic and imposing figure first appeared in Situ Hongshua's mind, but she immediately rejected it. She knew that with Murong Ditian's pride, he definitely wouldn't practice the piercing moon sword technique. So who is it? Chapter 50. Situ Hongshua could not figure it out, but the only thing she was sure of was that the person who left the sword mark on the sword testing stone was definitely a sword Dao master who had an extraordinary understanding of the sword Dao. This was not a sword Dao master, but someone who already had an extremely deep understanding of the sword Dao. Situ Hongshua had never seen a sword cultivator who had such an understanding before. Even some of the sword Dao experts in his family were far inferior to the person who had left a sword mark on the sword testing stone in terms of comprehension of the sword. However, although this person's understanding of the sword Dao is extremely deep, his cultivation is not very high. He did not leave behind a trace of true qi. Or could it be that he intentionally hid it? This was what Situ Hongshua was most puzzled about. If it was the former, then Situ Hongshua could only confirm that this person was definitely a sword Dao genius, who could be called monstrous. If it was the latter, then this person had returned to his original state, and his cultivation was definitely unfathomable. However, no matter which it was, Situ Hongshua was still curious. Seeing Situ Hongshua staring at the sword testing stone in a daze, Situ Ling tried to call out, "Big Sister Hongshua?" It was the first time that she had seen such a vivid expression on Situ Hongshua's beautiful face. Surprise, confusion, puzzlement, curiosity. Situ Hongshua was a famous beauty in the Saint Origin dynasty. In addition to her outstanding background, as well as her talent and strength, she was pursued and flattered by countless people. However, Situ Hongshua's beautiful face was always calm. She was clearly a girl in her 20s, but her state of mind was like an ancient well that had no ripples. This was the first time that Situ Ling had seen Situ Hongshua's expression change so much. Even when Situ Hongshua had announced her engagement with Murong Ditian, she still had an indifferent expression. TSK. Just who is it? Just a few sword scars on the sword testing stone is enough to make Big Sister Hongshua's heart flustered. Situ Ling couldn't help but mutter to herself. On the other hand, Situ Hongshua tightened her grip on her sword. Situ Hongshua's sword was called Wang Ning Mei. The sword was long and slender. The blade was like a woman's eyebrows. It was delicate yet extremely sharp. Moreover, there were some mysterious and complicated patterns on the sword. This Wang Ning Mei was a spiritual inscription divine weapon. Although it was only a low-grade spiritual inscription divine weapon, it was still very rare. Ha! Situ Hongshua shouted and raised her sword. Her snow-white dress fluttered in the wind like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. Her posture did not seem like she was wielding a sword, but more like she was dancing a beautiful dance. Even though Situ Hongshua often saw Situ Hongshua practicing her sword, every time she saw it, she would still gasp in surprise. The Situ Hongshua who was practicing her sword was another kind of beauty. Situ Hongshua's sword path was sometimes cold and austere. Sometimes it was like spring wind and rain. It was the Situ clan's 4-season sword technique. However, after experiencing it on the sword testing stone, Situ Hongshua clearly felt that there were some flaws in her previous sword moves. And these flaws were now being filled up bit by bit. All of this was due to the ordinary sword scars on the sword testing stone. Situ Hongxue, who was obsessed with the sword Dao, felt a kind of joy from the bottom of her heart. This kind of joy was something that she had not experienced for a long time, after knowing that she was going to be engaged with Morong Ditian. After practicing the sword for a while, Situ Hongxue was slightly out of breath, and sparkling beads of sweat appeared on her fair forehead. She also left a new sword scar on the sword testing stone. Sister Hongxue, are you going to continue waiting here? Situ Ling asked. Let's wait a little longer. Situ Hongxue looked at the sword scar on the sword testing stone and said, although she was a woman, there was a trace of arrogance in her heart. It was not arrogance, but confidence in her own sword Dao. She wanted to know if that person could still find a flaw in the improved Four Seasons sword technique. But unfortunately, after waiting for a few hours, that person still did not appear. Situ Hongxue felt a little regretful. Situ Hongxue sighed in her heart. In the entire Saint Origin dynasty, there was only one person who could make a peerless beauty like Situ Hongxue willingly wait for him. However, at this moment, Yi Guqin did not know that there was a great beauty waiting for him. After practicing on the sword testing stone, Yi Guqin casually walked in the desolate city. There was still some time before the sword-seeking steel erupted with sword qi. Yi Guqin was not in a hurry to enter the great desolate forest. Yi Guqin casually walked in the desolate city. From time to time, he would look at the geniuses fighting each other in the blood-fighting arena. He was quite relaxed. What sword cultivator? You're just a useless person. Suddenly, an extremely disdainful and cold voice came from the blood-fighting arena in front of him. Hearing this, Yi Guqin suddenly raised his eyebrows. He looked around and saw that the blood-fighting arena in front of him was completely surrounded. Many cultivators were watching the battle. There were two figures in the blood-fighting arena. One of them was a young man lying on the ground. His clothes were torn, and there were many wounds on his body. Even the sword in his hand had fallen to the side. He looked quite miserable. The other person was a burly man in black clothes. He held a bright golden saber in his hand. It was a supreme-grade spiritual weapon. He looked arrogant and looked at the young man, lying on the ground with disdain in his eyes. This is the so-called sword cultivator with the best attack. It's just SOSO. The saber is the real leader of all weapons. The sword is just a pretty embroidered pillow. The burly man in black walked forward and stepped on the sword that had fallen to the ground. Don't step on my sword. The young man on the ground crawled and reached out to hold the sword. A trace of coldness flashed in the burly man's eyes. He stepped down hard and was about to break the young man's hand and sword. At this moment, an extremely sharp sword qi suddenly broke through the air. The burly man in black's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly blocked it with his saber. Clang! An ear-piercing sound of metal clashing was heard. The burly man in black took several steps back. His hand was numb from the impact. Who is it? The burly man in black was shocked and angry. He was an expert in the third rank of the qi refining realm. How could he be forced to retreat? A young man in a black robe walked up to the blood-fighting ring with an indifferent expression. It was Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was not a meddlesome person and did not like to meddle in other people's business. However, the burly man in front of him could not insult the sword. Whether it was in his previous life or this life, whether it was Duga Wubai or Yi Guqin, they could not tolerate others insulting the sword. The sword was the life of a swordsman. Insulting the sword was insulting the dignity of a swordsman. Hold your sword well. Don't insult it. Yi Guqin tilted his head slightly and said to the young man beside him. The young man gritted his teeth and picked up the sword that had fallen to the ground. He bowed sincerely to Yi Guqin. Who is this person? How dare he meddle in other people's business? Doesn't he know how powerful that burly man is? His saber skills are enough to make one's scalp tingle. Some of the martial artists who were watching the battle discussed. Chapter 51. Brat, I'm afraid you don't know where I'm from? The man in black said coldly. Saber conferred King Palace? Yi Guqin's lips curled into an indifferent smile. Aside from the saber conferred King Palace, Yi Guqin couldn't think of any other place to be so disgusted with swords. How dare you meddle in my business when you know? The man in black said coldly, the way of the blade and the way of the sword are different from person to person. Everyone takes what they need. However, you deliberately promote the way of the blade and belittle the way of the sword. This is ignorance. Yi Guchen's primordial ring flashed and the calamity dust sword fell into his hand. Humph. I was wondering why you're a useless sword cultivator. The man in black said disdainfully. You'll know once you try. Yi Guchen didn't say anything else. His profound chi surged and his aura erupted. The aura of a level 9 essence martial artist was fully revealed. What? He's only at the 9th level of the essence origin realm? Yi Guchen's cultivation level was revealed, and the surrounding warriors were dumbfounded. They thought that since Yi Guchen decided to fight, he must be strong. However, they didn't expect that Yi Guchen hadn't even reached the chi refining realm. He dares to challenge a chi refining realm cultivator at the chi refining realm. Is he really courageous or stupid? Some of the spectators shook their heads. After seeing Yi Guchen's cultivation, the man in black's face turned gloomy. You're making a fool of me. You dare to attack me when you're only at the level 9 essence martial artist? The man in black was furious. Although he wasn't as strong as those on the heavenly saber list in the saber-conferred king palace, he was still somewhat famous. Now, he was being looked down upon by a sword cultivator at the level 9 essence martial artist. Die. Life and death were not important in the blood-fighting ring. Therefore, the man in black wanted to kill Yi Guchen decisively. His true chi surged and poured into his golden saber. The golden saber instantly emitted a dazzling golden light. An incomparably powerful saber chi burst out and went straight for Yi Guchen. The third cycle of the chi refinement realm was not much of a threat to Yi Guchen. Yang Kai's blood and chi surged from his body, accompanied by the aura of the 9th stage of the essence origin stage. Furthermore, he had used the Xiantian sword art, Aurora Swift Sword's unique skill, Aurora's passing. That dazzling sword light was beautiful, like the aurora in the sky, but it contained the sharpest cold light. After being reforged by the old drunkard, the tribulation dust had reached a whole new level. It originally only had 26 weapon veins, but now it had 42 weapon veins. There was no doubt that the more vessel veins one had, the more powerful the spirit artifact would be. Yi Guchen reckoned that the current Jiechen could be considered a middle-grade weapon, even among the divine weapons with spiritual inscriptions. When this sword was unleashed, the sword light directly tore through the saber chi and charged towards the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man's expression abruptly changed. He had clearly sensed that Yi Guchen was not as weak as he had imagined. Boom! The black-clothed man blocked with his saber, but the terrifying sword light almost bent the golden saber. A violent vibration came from both of his hands, numbing his arms. Yi Guchen would not hold back and attacked again. The vessel veins on the tribulation dust were lit up one by one, and the sword became even more dazzling, like a long-dormant lion that had been awakened. Yi Guchen was pleasantly surprised. He did not expect the old drunkard's forging skills to be so good. Although the tribulation dust was an extraordinary divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions, it had reached its peak after being reforged by the old drunkard. With the support of 42 vessel veins, the power of the tribulation dust had reached a terrifying level. The sword light on the tip of the sword made the surrounding warriors' scalps tingle. A top-grade spirit artifact. No, it's definitely better than a top-grade spirit artifact. It's a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. No wonder he dares to attack with only the cultivation of the essence origin stage. The surrounding people exclaimed. Although one's cultivation was important to measure one's strength, spiritual artifacts, martial arts and secret techniques were also a part of one's strength. Yi Guchen drew his sword, and the sword light was accompanied by lightning. Rumble! A thunderous rumble resounded, as though the 9 heavens had rumbled. It was the horizontal lightning sword's ultimate move, sudden thunder. The sword light was as fast as lightning as it shot towards the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man gritted his teeth. He knew that Yi Guchen was difficult to deal with, and he could imagine the consequences if he did not go all out. Golden Lion Blade Art, Sky Lion Slash. The black-clothed man circulated the true energy in his body, and rays of golden light rose from his golden saber. vaguely forming the shape of a golden lion. Of course, the golden lion was illusory, because only experts at the divine soul realm and above could form it with their true energy. However, it also showed how extraordinary this blade art was. It's actually a top-grade Xiantian blade art from the saber-conferred royal palace. There were some knowledgeable people among the spectators, and they immediately recognized that it was an extremely sharp blade art from the saber-conferred royal palace. Boom! The illusory golden lion collided with the sword light, and the resulting shockwaves caused the ceiling array on the blood battle arena to tremble. Break! Yi Guchen's blood essence erupted, and the illusory image of a dragon and elephant formed around him. At this moment, he possessed the strength of a dragon and elephant, and the sword light was even more powerful. At the same time, the Calamity Dust sword released a glaring brilliance. A spiritual rune lit up on the sword. The Calamity Dust sword released an even greater power, and an extremely sharp sword aura gushed out. At this moment, Yi Guchen had finally activated the Calamity Dust sword's broken-edge spiritual rune. This was also the first time Yi Guchen had used the true power of a spiritual rune weapon. Just as the broken-edge spiritual tattoo was activated, the extremely sharp sword light tore the phantom of the golden lion apart, as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The black-clothed man's face changed drastically, and he circulated all his true energy to block the attack with his golden saber. The tip of the Calamity Dust sword touched the golden saber, and Yi Guchen's eyes flashed with sharpness. Break! Crack! Something that caused all the surrounding martial warriors to be dumbfounded happened. On the golden blade, cracks spread out from the tip of the sword as the center. One must know that the golden saber was a supreme-grade spiritual artifact, and it wasn't something that an ordinary spiritual artifact could compare to. However, Yi Guchen had done it. The broken-edge spiritual rune was known for its ability to pierce through armor, and the sword aura it released was too sharp. Yi Guchen's wrist shook, and the Calamity Dust sword released a glaring sword light. The golden saber shattered under the black-clothed man's shocked gaze. The black-clothed man was also struck by the sword aura, and his face turned red as he spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, his body was pierced by the fragments of the golden saber, and he flew out with blood dripping from his wounds. He collapsed on the ground heavily injured. The surrounding people were dumbfounded. Who was this young man? He actually possessed such a divine weapon. At the same time, Yi Guchen's ruthless methods had shocked them. He didn't show any mercy to the disciples of the saber-conferred monarch hall. Boom! The moment Yi Guchen sent the black-clothed man flying, a powerful saber aura suddenly charged towards Yi Guchen. Chapter 52. Despicable. Many martial artists were stunned by this sudden saber strike, and then they cursed in their hearts. Such methods were indeed not honorable. Yi Guchen glanced sideways and his eyes turned cold. Even though his state of mind was already as calm as an ancient well, he still felt a little angry at such a method. Just as Yi Guchen was about to make his move, an azure sword ray shot over from another direction and collided with the saber chi. Haha, the people of the saber-sealing monarch hall are still so despicable. A faint voice sounded along with the azure sword ray. Everyone looked over and saw a young man in green robes. He had a jade-like complexion and a vigorous figure. He walked over casually with faint green sword chi circulating around him. It's Chu Qingqi from the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest. As an outstanding talent in the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest, Chu Qingqi's name was well known among the younger generation in the Saint Origin dynasty. Therefore, it was easy for others to recognize him. I didn't expect your sky and blue sky sword chi to improve again. A muscular young man in red robes walked over from the direction where the saber chi came from. He was Zhao Fengyang, a disciple of the saber-sealing monarch hall on the heavenly saber list. He looked at the indistinct green sword chi that appeared around Chu Qingqi and felt a slight fear in his heart. The saber-sealing monarch hall and the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest had fought for a long time, so they had a good understanding of each other's martial techniques. Chu Qingqi cultivated the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest spiritual cultivation technique, the Sky and Blue Sky technique. After cultivating this cultivation technique, One could refine the sky in blue sky sword chi that was extremely powerful. The people of the saber-sealing monarch hall are really despicable, said Chu Qingqi. Zhao Fengyang turned to look at the black-clothed man on the ground with an ugly expression. He walked over and fed the black-clothed man some healing elixirs before turning his gaze to Yi Guchen. Brother, you're really ruthless. Zhao Fengyang's voice was a little gloomy. After all, the black-clothed man had clearly stated his identity as a disciple of the saber-conferred royal hall. However, Yi Guchen didn't hold back at all. Furthermore, the black-clothed man had been reduced to such a miserable state. If news of this spread, it would affect the reputation of the saber-conferred royal hall. Then do you know that this person wanted to cripple his opponent's arm? Crippling a sword cultivator's hand is no different from killing him. I am merely giving him a taste of his own medicine. Even when facing a heavenly saber-ranking disciple like Zhao Fengyang, Yi Guchen did not show any signs of weakness. Even so, not everyone can humiliate the disciples of the saber-conferred royal palace. Zhao Fengyang took a step forward as a vigorous true qi rose from his body. His aura far surpassed that of the muscular man in black. He had already reached the 7th cycle of the qi refinement realm. Yi Guchen was not afraid in the face of such a strong pressure. The blood and qi in his body surged. Vaguely, the sound of a dragon resonating with an elephant reverberated endlessly. Ha! A 7th cycle qi refinement realm cultivator bullying an essence origin realm cultivator. How embarrassing. Just when Zhao Fengyang and Yi Guchen were at daggers drawn, Azure Sword Qi spread out once more. A true Qi pressure that wasn't any weaker than Zhao Fengyang's swept out. Zhao Fengyang's face sank slightly. Chu Qingqi, you have plenty of opportunities to fight with me. Right now, I'm dealing with someone else. Don't interfere. Zhao Fengyang snorted coldly. The Sword Sex Pagoda Forest is a Sword Dao holy land. How can I watch you bully a sword cultivator? Moreover, this little brother is standing up for a sword cultivator. Chu Qingqi still didn't back down. Good, very good. Zhao Fengyang suppressed the anger in his body. Although he wasn't afraid of Chu Qingqi, he knew that Chu Qingqi wasn't easy to deal with. He still had to challenge the sword-seeking steel and obstruct Chu Qingqi. It wasn't the right time to make a move. And for some reason, Yi Guchen also gave Zhao Fengyang a faint sense of uneasiness. He always felt that Yi Guchen wasn't simple. With Chu Qingqi obstructing him, and not knowing Yi Guchen's background, Zhao Fengyang had to hold back his anger for the time being. Humph, see you at the sword-seeking steel. Zhao Fengyang exhaled deeply. He first glanced at Chu Qingqi, then stared at Yi Guchen with eyes as sharp as knives. Yi Guchen looked calm and composed, but he knew that there would be a lot of twists and turns in the sword-seeking steel. Yi Guchen didn't want to cause trouble, but he wasn't afraid of it. When the sword-seeking steel opens, it will give you a big surprise, Zhao Fengyang thought to himself with a cold expression. With Zhao Fengyang's departure, the atmosphere of the entire blood-fighting arena relaxed. However, the surrounding warriors were all looking at Yi Guchen with a look of surprise and shock. He had challenged a disciple of the saber-conferring monarch palace with his cultivation at the 9th level of the essence realm, and had been defeated so miserably. Not to mention, he had a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions, and his extraordinary swordsmanship. No one would believe that such a person didn't have a background. However, this wasn't the Sky River province. Although Yi Guchen was once the leader of the Sky River 7 Prides, he wasn't famous in the Beichen prefecture. Perhaps some people had heard of the name Yi Guchen from the Sky River province, but they had never seen him with their own eyes. Therefore, not many people knew about Yi Guchen's identity. Thank you for your help. Yi Guchen cupped his hands slightly to Chu Qingqi. With his current cultivation and many trump cards, he wasn't afraid of Zhao Fengyang. But after all, Chu Qingqi had good intentions, so Yi Guchen nodded slightly. Haha, we're both sword cultivators, so this is not a big deal. I see that although your cultivation is only in the essence origin realm, your swordsmanship is superb, so you must not be a nobody, Chu Qingqi said with a faint smile. I'm just a nobody. Yi Guchen shook his head. He didn't want to expose his identity for the time being. After all, as the leader of the Sky River 7 Prides, The title of the youth sword master was quite eye-catching. Yi Guqin had come to the Beichun prefecture to carry out the Scarlet mission. Although no one knew that Yi Guqin was the sword demon, it was best to keep it a secret. Haha, alright. But you must be here for the sword-seeking steel. I believe we will meet again. Chu Qingqi smiled faintly at Yi Guqin, and then turned to leave. This sword sect pagoda forest is quite extraordinary, Yi Guqin thought to himself as he watched Chu Qingqi leave. Chu Qingqi's skies and blue sky sword chi alone gave Yi Guqin a feeling of extreme sharpness. Such a martial art technique was extremely rare in the outside world, but in the sword sect pagoda forest, there seemed to be more than one martial art technique of the same level. It seems that if I want to obtain profound swordsmanship martial arts, I have to go to the 7 great forces to find them, Yi Guqin thought. Only the 7 great forces could casually possess more than one spiritual level martial arts technique. Yi Guqin suddenly thought that the elite assembly of the 10 prefectures was not too far away. When he stood out, he could choose a force to join. At present, Yi Guqin hadn't decided which force to join. But before that, Yi Guqin first needed to get rid of a stumbling block, Xia Yubing. Chapter 53. After the commotion at the Blood Arena, Yi Guqin returned to the inn he was staying at. Although Yi Guqin had caused quite a commotion, and even beat up a disciple of the Sealed Blade Monarch Palace, the black-clothed man was clearly only an ordinary disciple in the palace. There was still a huge gap between him and Zhao Fengyang, who was ranked on the Heavenly Saber list. Therefore, at the beginning, there were people talking about Yi Guqin. After that, very few people talked about it. This was because there were too many geniuses in Desolate City. The Sword Quest tablet was about to open, and the geniuses from various factions had all gathered in Desolate City. There were countless conflicts and battles, and Yi Guqin's achievements were quickly drowned out by the news. Yi Guqin was happy with this. Otherwise, people would steal strange glances at him when he walked on the streets. In the next few days, Yi Guqin did not cultivate. Instead, he walked around and adjusted his condition to the best. He vaguely felt that the Sword Quest tablet was very important to him. He had definitely gained a lot from it. Yi Guqin wandered around Desolate City. For some reason, he came to the sword test stone. Yi Guqin raised his head and looked at the sword test stone. He found that there were new sword marks on its surface. It should be that female sword cultivator. Yi Guqin's eyes shone brightly. At the same time, there was a trace of admiration in his heart. That female sword cultivator's talent in the sword Dao was definitely extraordinary. At the same time, she was also very intelligent. The sword techniques she left on the sword test stone had clearly improved greatly. Many of the flaws had been filled in. Such a genius was extremely rare, even in the Jianghu in his previous life. Every one of them would become a grandmaster-level figure who founded their own sect. Of course, there were even more geniuses in this world. However, geniuses in the sword Dao were also very rare. Interesting. Yi Guqin smiled. The tribulation dust sword appeared in his hand once again. It was as if he was playing a game with the female sword cultivator he had never met before. Although they had never met, Yi Guqin knew that the female sword cultivator was definitely not a nobody. In fact, she might even occupy a spot on the Heaven Pride list. Yi Guqin drew his sword, still using the piercing moon swordsmanship. Although it was an ungraded swordsmanship, it had been cultivated to the level of perfection. As the sword moves flowed, there was a faint feeling of returning to simplicity. If it were Yi Guqin, who was only 17 years old, it would be very difficult for him to display such a simple Taoist rhyme. However, the sword demon's soul that had been in the Jianghu for more than 40 years had fused with his body. Therefore, he could display such a faint Taoist rhyme. Although I have filled in the gaps, I have yet to comprehend the essence of the swordsmanship. It only has the form but not the meaning. It is just a frame. Yi Guqin shook his head lightly. After leaving another sword mark on the sword testing stone, Yi Guqin left. Not long after, a figure in snow-white clothes arrived like a fairy, and her elegance carried a peerlessly beautiful and otherworldly bearing. It was precisely Sito Hongxue. When the beautiful fairy saw the new sword mark on the sword testing stone, Her beautiful eyes widened cutely. Such a surprised expression rarely appeared on her beautiful face. Sister Hongxue, what's wrong? Could it be? Situ Hongxue followed behind her. When she saw Situ Hongshue's expression, she knew what was going on. It has been broken again. I have already filled in the gaps of the swordsmanship, but why is it still? Situ Hongxue was really surprised because her 4-season swordsmanship had been broken again by the piercing moon swordsmanship. This did not mean that the piercing moon swordsmanship was more powerful than the 4-season swordsmanship. It was just that the person who performed the piercing moon swordsmanship had a deep understanding of the piercing moon swordsmanship. Although Situ Hongxue had been cultivating the 4-season swordsmanship since she was young, she had been stuck at the higher realm. This was because it was too difficult to comprehend a spiritual level swordsmanship to the small mastery level. Even a genius in the way of the sword would need some opportunities to comprehend a spiritual level swordsmanship from a young age. Therefore, to judge whether a genius in the sword cultivation lived up to their name, one only needed to see if they had comprehended a spiritual level swordsmanship to the small mastery level. Situ Hongxue was still one step away from the small mastery level. This is not just the piercing moon swordsmanship's path of swordsmanship. It also contains a special charm. Could it be? Situ Hongxue was intelligent to begin with. Now that she had been enlightened, she felt as if the fog was gradually dispersing. Yes, it's the concept. When every swordsmanship is performed, there is a concept in addition to the moves. Otherwise, it would only be superficial. For example, in order to truly unleash the power of the 4-season swordsmanship, one must comprehend the concept of the cycle of the 4 seasons. Situ Hongshue's beautiful eyes became brighter and brighter, as if she had been enlightened. The person who left behind the moves has an unprecedented understanding of swordsmanship. At the very least, none of the seniors in the family who practiced swordsmanship had such a deep understanding of swordsmanship. Situ Hongxue muttered to herself, somewhat absent-minded. She was a person who loved swordsmanship. Now that she had met a person whose understanding of swordsmanship could be said to be at the level of a grandmaster, she was both curious and yearning. This was not the kind of yearning that she had for a grandmaster of swordsmanship, but a yearning that she had for a grandmaster of swordsmanship. To be able to have such an understanding of swordsmanship, and to have Taoist rhymes permeating every move, he must be a grandmaster of swordsmanship, Situ Hongxue thought to herself. Previously, she had been wondering whether the person who left behind the moves was a young genius or a grandmaster of swordsmanship. But today, after seeing such a return to the basics of swordsmanship, Situ Hongxue felt that it would be difficult for the younger generation to have such an understanding. She thought that it must be a grandmaster of swordsmanship. Situ Hongxue began to practice swordsmanship again. This time, she performed the 4-season swordsmanship. It was vaguely different from usual. As the moves of the 4 seasons alternated, it seemed as if the seasons were really rotating. Sometimes, the autumn maple would dance and sometimes, frost and snow would fill the sky. Of course, although Situ Hongxue was smart, it would be difficult for her to improve in a short amount of time. However, she had already pointed out the direction. After that, Situ Hongxue continued to wait here. It was as if she was determined to wait for that senior. But a day passed and still no one came. Situ Hongxue lightly stomped her feet, seemingly a little unhappy. Situ Ling was stunned. This was the first time she had seen Situ Hongxue act like a little girl. Her expression was just like a young girl waiting for her lover. However, a day later someone came, but it was not Yi Guchen. His figure was tall and handsome, and his eyebrows were sword-like. On his back, he carried a long sword that was wrapped in many bandages. The bandages were covered in some strange symbols, which seemed to be sealing runes. As this person walked, his aura permeated the air, faintly emitting a kind of fierce aura, which seemed to cause the surrounding air to solidify. However, after seeing Situ Hongxue, who was in front of the sword testing stone, that fierce aura disappeared. Like the spring wind and rain, the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. Like the melting of an iceberg, this smile would definitely cause many young girls to be intoxicated. Hongxue, To be able to call out such an intimate name, there was naturally only one person. Beichen Mansion's #1 prodigy, Morong Ditian. Chapter 54. Morong Ditian's reputation in the Beichen manor was unparalleled, and he was publicly acknowledged as the #1 prodigy. At such a young age, his cultivation had already reached the 7th transformation of qi refinement. At the same time, he had also cultivated many powerful sword techniques. In all aspects, he could be said to be invincible. Different from Morong Ming, whose talent was slightly inferior, Morong Ditian had received the full nurturing of the Morong family. It should be known that if a super family used all their resources to nurture a person, even a person with ordinary talent could become a prodigy. Not to mention that Morong Ditian was a 6th-rank prodigy with extraordinary talent. Although he didn't have any innate abilities, his talent, temperament, and comprehension far surpassed ordinary prodigies. Even Yi Guchen's archenemy, Xia Yubing, was only a 5th-rank prodigy. If she didn't receive the inheritance of the North River Sword King, she wouldn't even have the qualifications to be on par with Yi Guchen. From this, it could be seen how extraordinary Morong Ditian was. And such a youth was the perfect Dao companion in the eyes of all the females. However, facing Morong Ditian's arrival, Situ Hongxue frowned slightly and said, "What are you doing here?" Her tone was calm, and even had a trace of indifference. The current Situ Hongxue didn't have the attitude of a little girl anymore. She appeared to be indifferent, like a goddess from the 9 heavens. "I'm just here to see my fiancé." Facing the indifferent Situ Hongxue, Morong Ditian didn't mind at all, and the corner of his mouth still carried a faint smile. "You're disturbing my sword practice." Situ Hongxue turned her head away. Although Morong Ditian could be said to be perfect in all aspects, Situ Hongxue was also a dragon among men. Naturally, she wouldn't be infatuated with Morong Ditian like other girls. Furthermore, she didn't have any feelings for Morong Ditian. It was just a marriage between 2 aristocratic families. No matter how aloof Situ Hongxue was, she was still a member of the Situ family. She couldn't go against the will of the entire family. Furthermore, since Situ Hongxue was born, she hadn't liked any guy. Therefore, to her, feelings were no longer important. Only the sword was where her heart was. "If you want to train in the sword, I can accompany you." Morong Ditian continued to smile. "Aren't you annoying?" Big sister Hong Shui already said that she wants to practice the sword by herself, Situ Ling said with a frown. She was extremely disgusted with Morong Ming, and she didn't have any good impression of Morong Ditian as well. Although Morong Ditian's attitude was always warm, and he always had a faint smile on his face, in the depths of his eyes, there seemed to always be a kind of indifference. In the younger generation of the Beichen manor, if I say that I am #2 in the way of the sword, who would dare to say that they are #1? Morong Ditian said casually. His words were very light, but they were so loud that even the deaf could hear them. And with Morong Ditian's tone, it was obvious that he wasn't being arrogant when he said those words. Instead, it was because he had absolute confidence in himself. Heh! Situ Hongxue suddenly laughed. Her smile was as beautiful as 100 flowers blooming. Even if it was Morong Ditian, his mind was also taken away by this smile, and he was stunned for an instant. However, it only lasted for an instant before it recovered. "Hongxue, what are you laughing at?" Morong Ditian suppressed his admiration for Situ Hongshue's beautiful smile and asked. "I'm laughing at the fact that a frog in a well can't talk about the sea, and a summer insect can't talk about the ice. You will know after looking at this sword-seeking steel." Situ Hongxue shook her head. Morong Ditian walked forward and stared at the sword-seeking steel. He first casually glanced at it, then faintly frowned. He was naturally able to recognize the trajectory of Situ Hongshue's sword. However, the sword mark of the other person caused Morong Ditian to frown. "Someone else came here, and it's a man." Morong Ditian's expression changed for the first time. He was no longer smiling, but had become somewhat cold and solemn. "Oh, do you mind?" Situ Hongxue asked. "There is indeed some skill. However, there isn't a trace of true qi. Perhaps, it's just a piece of trash who only knows a little about sword arts." Morong Ditian's expression was incomparably indifferent. He had long viewed Situ Hongxue as his exclusive property and wouldn't allow anyone to touch her, even if it was just getting close to her. In Morong Ditian's eyes, he didn't need Situ Hongxue to practice his sword arts. Situ Hongxue only needed to be a canary in a cage for him to enjoy and play with. You are jealous. Jealous of this person's comprehension towards the way of the sword. Situ Hongshue's words were filled with sarcasm. What kind of sword art is this? Watch as I break it with brute force. The aura around Morong Ditian's body suddenly exploded, and the true chi of the seventh transformation of chi refinement was emitted without restraint. At the same time, the sword that was wrapped in bandages on his back suddenly leaped up and landed in Morong Ditian's hand. Mysterious heaven sword art break. Morong Ditian waved his sword. That long sword was still wrapped in bandages, but an incomparably valiant sword chi was released. Majestic and fearful. The sword chi was like the judgment of the heavens as it landed on the sword testing stone. Previously, Morong Ming had also executed the mysterious heaven sword art, but compared to Morong Ditian, the sword art that Morong Ming executed was like a child playing house. An incomparably thick and deep sword mark slashed across the entire sword testing stone from top to bottom. Almost all of the sword marks on the sword testing stone were erased by this sword mark. It had to be known that this was an incomparably hard basalt rock. To be able to leave such a sword mark on basalt rock, it could be seen how powerful Morong Ditian's sword was. What are you doing? Situ Hongshua's expression suddenly changed. She still wanted to comprehend the concept of the sword on the sword testing stone. But in the end, her sword was destroyed by Morong Ditian. You only need to comprehend my concept of the sword. Morong Ditian's words were domineering and incomprehensible. You are unreasonable. Situ Hongshua's delicate face was slightly pale, and her brows were tightly knitted. You will eventually understand me. After we pass the sword-seeking stone, it will be our wedding day. Have a good rest. Morong Ditian flicked his sleeves and left. If I encounter the person who left a sword mark on the sword testing stone, no matter who you are, you will die. Morong Ditian coldly said in his heart. Big sister Hongxue, that Morong Ditian is really too much. You won't be happy if you marry him. Sita Ling gritted her teeth and said angrily, Sai, the fate of the clan is difficult. Father secretly told me that my Sita clan seems to be coveted by many people. Only by forming a marriage alliance with the Morong clan can we obtain a chance of survival. Situ Hongxue closed her beautiful eyes, and there was a painful expression between her brows, causing others to feel pity for her. It was very obvious that the rise and fall of a clan needed to be shouldered by a woman. This burden was a bit too heavy. However, Situ Hongxue didn't escape, and she shouldered it all by herself. It's a pity that the sword testing stone has been destroyed, and the concept is gone. Situ Hongxue felt that it was a pity, and at the same time she felt guilty. She knew that the person who left the sword mark had the intention to give her pointers, but now, it was destroyed by Morong Ditian. In the end, Situ Hongxue sighed. She raised her jade hand, and took out a hairpin from her hair. It was as gentle as jade, and it even had the fragrance of Situ Hongshue's hair. Big sister Hongxue, you. Situ Ling opened her eyes wide, and was incomparably shocked. Situ Hongxue actually left her personal accessory behind. This action was very unusual. Even Morong Ditian hadn't received any of Situ Hongshue's personal accessories before. Furthermore, that hairpin wasn't just an accessory. It seems that although big sister Hongxue didn't meet that person, a mark has already been left in her heart. Situ Ling sighed, and she didn't know if this was good or bad. Soon after, Situ Hongxue and Situ Ling both left. Another day passed, and Yi Guqin came to this place again. Chapter 55. Yi Guqin was curious. He wanted to see if the female sword cultivator would comprehend anything else. But when he saw the vertical sword mark on the sword test rock, his expression changed slightly. What a domineering sword path. Yi Guqin sighed inwardly. This sword move was extremely ferocious and domineering. It was definitely not an ordinary sword art. It was definitely a spirit-level sword art. and its grade was probably not low even among the spirit-level sword arts. Yi Guqin thought to himself, the person who attacked with the sword has superb swordsmanship and a solid foundation. However, his sword moves are too sharp. Obviously, he is from the younger generation. However, looking at this sword move, it is obvious that he is venting his anger by destroying all my sword moves. Suddenly, he found something under the sword test rock. He picked it up and saw that it was a woman's hairpin. The hairpin was like jade and had a lingering fragrance that filled his nose. Looks like it was left by the female sword cultivator. Yi Guqin thought. He did not want to leave it because he was just following fate and did not want to get involved. But in the next moment, Yi Guqin was surprised. He infused a wisp of profound qi into the hairpin. The hairpin that looked like it was carved from jade suddenly released a circle of light. This circle of white light was like a halo behind the head of a Buddha. It enveloped Yi Guqin's body. It's a supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon? Yi Guqin was dumbfounded. A defensive spiritual weapon was more precious than an offensive spiritual weapon. Moreover, it was a supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon. The only supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon that Yi Guqin had seen was the red-haired ghost shield. After some hesitation, Yi Guqin accepted it. He knew that this was the female sword cultivator's way of repaying him. Because of Yi Guqin's advice, she had benefited greatly. In terms of value, it was indeed not lower than this defensive spiritual weapon. Looks like the female sword cultivator's background is not ordinary. Yi Guqin thought inwardly. The sword test rock had been destroyed. There was no point in leaving a sword mark. Yi Guqin shook his head slightly and left. There was nothing to be regretful about. He had just done it casually. After leaving the sword testing rock, Yi Guqin returned to his inn. A few days later, when the light of the celestial arch sword shone through the window and onto the ground, Yi Guqin, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, suddenly sensed something. He opened his eyes, opened the window and looked into the distance. The desolation city wasn't far from the great desolation forest. Yi Guqin seemed to be able to see an unparalleled pressure of the sword realm sweeping out from a towering mountain in the depths of the great desolation forest. That sword intent seemed to disregard even the will of the heavens and earth, as it looked down upon the universe and shook the heavens. An absolute master of the way of the sword. Yi Guqin frowned. He could feel the powerful sword will. After coming to this world, there were not many people that Yi Guqin recognized as powerful in the way of the sword. This was the second one. The first was naturally the blood-listening tower's master, who had never shown himself, and only a strand of the sword insight contained within the sound of his flute. At this moment, the entire desolation city was in an uproar, because the sword-seeking steel in the great desolation forest had finally opened again. Within the city, countless people swarmed out and headed towards the great desolation forest. It could be said that as long as one could obtain a seat at the sword-seeking steel, one's name would definitely spread far and wide in the Beichen mansion, not to mention the opportunity to obtain many opportunities. Yi Guqin did not delay either. He put on his bamboo hat and headed straight for the Great Desolation Forest. The Great Desolation Forest was about the same size as the Cloud Valley mountain range, but it was more desolate and ancient. There was no lack of third and fourth ranked demonic beasts in the depths of the forest. Some of the demonic beasts were even feared by divine soul realm experts. Within the forest, the vegetation was dense, and the huge trees towered into the sky. Sunlight could only pass through a few gaps, casting incomplete spots on the ground, causing the dark forest to appear even more deathly silent and cold. With the opening of the sword-seeking steel, the originally deathly silent Great Desolation Forest suddenly became noisy. Many geniuses entered the forest, wanting to reach the mountain peak where the sword-seeking steel was. From time to time, there would be miserable cries echoing from various parts of the forest. Those were the geniuses who encountered powerful demonic beasts and lost their lives in the mouths of demonic beasts. Of course, there were also some true geniuses who were not afraid of these demonic beasts. They walked through the Great Desolation Forest as if they were taking a stroll in the park. Looks like I will definitely have a seat at the sword-seeking steel this time. A young man wearing a black and white robe casually killed a second-ranked demonic beast, with a proud smile on his face. He was the limitless sword sect's Lu Tianying. I will obtain first place at the sword-seeking steel. Sita Hongxue. I will let you know that only I am worthy of you. Morong Ditian walked casually within the forest, and he did not even draw his sword. As he flipped his palm, countless sword chi soared into the sky and tore apart the surrounding demonic beasts, causing blood to fill the sky. I wonder if anyone will be able to obtain the sword-seeking steel's approval this time. In another place, Chu Qingqi was dressed in green. Green sword chi surged around his body, making it difficult for demonic beasts to get close to him. In the central region of the Great Desolation Forest, a scarlet demonic python was entrenched beside a small tree. There were bright red fruits on the tree trunk. Whoosh! A sword light suddenly shot towards the scarlet demonic python. The demonic python hissed and spat out a dense scarlet poisonous fog. However, that sword light directly tore apart the poisonous fog and chopped off the demonic python's head. Even the demonic python did not have time to react to such a swift sword light. A black-robed figure landed beside the small tree. It was Yi Guchen. Snake saliva fruit, a rare supreme-grade spirit medicine. Yi Guchen lifted his hand and plucked a few snake saliva fruits. His current cultivation was already at the 9th level of the essence realm. He was not far from the chi refining realm. However, he would only enter the chi refining realm after he broke through to the perfect physical body. Therefore, Yi Guchen also needed to gather and prepare some spirit medicine to assist him in cultivating the perfect physical body. Although there were many dangers in the Great Desolation Forest, it was also a land of treasures. There was no lack of rare and exotic fruits, which were very useful for cultivation. At the same time, Yi Guchen continued to hone his swordsmanship, especially the piercing moon swordsmanship. When Yi Guchen performed it, he felt a sense of carefreeness. He felt that this swordsmanship could continue to be improved. If he had an epiphany, it was possible for him to practice it to the perfection of martial arts. After that, Yi Guchen continued to hone his swordsmanship and collect all kinds of rare treasures. As for the sword-seeking steel, he was not in a hurry. Not everyone could sit on those seats. After a day, a piece of news suddenly spread in the Great Desolation Forest. In a deep valley, someone had found an extremely rare material, the meteorite iron. As soon as the news came out, everyone was shocked. The meteorite iron was a precious material for forging magic weapons with spiritual inscriptions. Its characteristic was that it could bear the power of many spiritual inscriptions. It should be known that the power of a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions mainly came from the spiritual inscriptions. The more spiritual inscriptions there were, the stronger the power of the magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions would be. However, the more spiritual inscriptions there were, the more power it would bring. If an ordinary material exceeded the limit it could bear, it would collapse. In other words, the casting material could not bear the power of more spiritual inscriptions. However, the meteorite iron was special in that it could bear the power of spiritual inscriptions very well. If a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions could only bear one spiritual inscription, then after adding a little meteorite iron, it could bear 2 or more spiritual inscriptions. This showed how precious it was. Let's go and have a look. Yi Guchen was collecting materials to forge a soft sword, and obviously, he could not miss the meteorite iron. Chapter 56. In a valley in the Great Wild Forest there were many people. Many cultivators had rushed over after hearing the news. They all wanted to find the rare meteorite iron in the deep valley. Outside the valley, Yi Guchen landed on the crown of an ancient tree and looked at the valley not far away. Although the news had spread, it was obviously not so easy to find it. Everyone in the valley, leave within 10 breaths. A loud shout spread throughout the valley. A group of people came to the entrance of the valley. The leader was dressed in a black and white robe with a sun and moon pattern embroidered on his chest. It was Lu Tianying of the Limitless Sword Sect. The people behind him were also dressed in the robes of the Limitless Sword Sect. Although their auras were not as strong as his, They were comparable to the heaven's prides of a prefecture. Although the meteorite iron is extremely precious, there should be no shortage of this treasure in the limitless sword sect. What is this Lu Tianying trying to do? Yi Guchen frowned slightly, sensing that things were not simple. After Lu Tianying spoke, some cultivators also secretly cursed it and left. Although they were extremely unwilling, the limitless sword sect was too powerful, and there was no way to resist. After the miscellaneous people were expelled, Lu Tianying and the others entered the valley. Yi Guchen's expression changed. He used the willow catkin wind movement technique and quietly sneaked in. He did not make a move. Instead, he waited for Lu Tianying and the others. "Senior brother Lu, I found it." A voice sounded. It was a disciple of the limitless sword sect. He found a hidden cracked rock under the cover of grass and trees. There were some silver-like metal minerals scattered around. It was the meteorite iron. "Ha, I really found it." Lu Tianying's eyes were filled with joy. Yi Guchen, who was in the dark, watched attentively. At this moment, a figure flashed in the air and directly rushed to the cracked rock. With a wave of his sleeve, he took the meteorite iron into his bag. "It's him." Yi Guchen narrowed his eyes. A figure appeared. He was dressed in a golden robe and had a round figure with a sword at his waist. It was the little fatty of unknown origin from the auction. "It's you again." Lu Tianying glared. "Thank you." The little fatty smiled cheekily as he looked at Lu Tianying. He was not in a hurry to run, because he knew that Lu Tianying could not catch up with his speed. "So you think you can leave?" The anger on Lu Tianying's face suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a sneer. Little fatty was stunned. He felt that the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. "Let's go." With a thought, little fatty didn't stay any longer. Golden light flickered beneath his feet as he flashed away. At this moment, the ground suddenly lit up. It was a formation rune that flowed on the ground like ripples. A powerful sealing force soared into the sky, forming a dense chain of sealing chains that locked the little fatty within. "It's a little overkill to use a low-class human-level sealing formation on you." An old voice sounded. An old man with white hair and beard walked out from the dense forest. It was Master Gu, who had been angered by the little fatty. Beside him was the Divine Soul Realm expert. Little fatty's face instantly turned ugly. "It's a low-class human-level formation." Yi Guchen, who was hiding in the dark, could not help but be shocked. The little Ashura sword formation he had was also a low-class human-level formation, but its function was different from this formation. This formation focused on sealing, which was obviously to restrain the little fatty's strange speed. As for the so-called meteorite iron, it was obviously a trap set up by Lu Tianying and Master Gu to capture the little fatty. "Are you guys bent on messing with yours truly?" Little fatty placed his hands behind his back, with an unfathomable look on his face. However, with his chubby face, which even looked a little rich, it was out of place no matter how one looked at it. Just deliberately mystifying. Lu Tianying sneered. "We'll capture you today and wash away the shame of that day." The Divine Soul Realm expert beside Master Gu also stared coldly at the little fatty. As a Divine Soul Realm expert, it was the first time he had been so humiliated. "Don't force me to draw my sword, or you'll regret it," the little fatty said with a serious face. "A sword? What sword?" Lu Tianying's face was full of disdain. The Limitless Sword Sect was a sword sect, and Lu Tianying boasted that the Limitless Sword Sect was the #1 sword sect in the Saint Origin dynasty. He had seen all kinds of famous swords and sword techniques, so he was naturally disdainful of the little fatty. "Sai, you really don't understand. My sword is called my truth. It's a sword that pursues the great Tao and seeks the true self." The little fatty slowly pressed his hand on the sword hilt at his waist. "My truth sword?" Lu Tianying murmured. "That's right, you're really cheap," the little fatty said with compassion. Lu Tianying was stunned for a moment, and his face immediately flushed red. "Are you playing with me?" Lu Tianying was furious. He did not say anything else and directly attacked. His true chi turned into sword chi and slashed at the little fatty. On the other side, the Divine Soul Realm expert also attacked. His true chi condensed, and his hand pressed down on the little fatty. "Unsheath my truth." With a sword in hand, I'm invincible. The little fatty howled. Golden light flashed under his feet, and he directly flashed to the other side. He then pulled out his sword and slashed at the ceiling formation on the ground. It did not look like he was using a sword, but more like a farmer chopping firewood. However, the ceiling formation was obviously not something that could be broken in a short time. Lu Tianying and the Divine Soul Realm expert had already attacked again. The little fatty relied on his mysterious body movement to hold on, while trying his best to break the formation. Yi Guchen, who was hiding in the dark, saw this and shook his head. Although he was very interested in the little fatty's mysterious silver heavy water, it was obviously very difficult to get it under the current circumstances. Boom! Lu Tianying once again pointed his sword finger at the little fatty. Luotian protection! Little fatty let out a cry, and his entire body surged with light. Vaguely, an illusory figure formed around him. It was like the guardian Vajra of Buddhism, and it enveloped little fatty's body. Rumble! The sword finger fell on the guardian Vajra's illusory figure, but only a rumbling sound erupted, and it did not break through its defense. Damn it, it was originally mine. Just give it back to me. Lu Tianying's expression became even more gloomy when he saw the little fatty display Luotian protection. The Luotian protection was originally his, but the little fatty snatched it away. Now that he saw the little fatty display it, Lu Tianying's heart itched with hatred. However, although the little fatty had Luotian protection, there was another Divine Soul Realm expert besides Lu Tianying. 9 Extreme Golden Palm. The Divine Soul Realm expert finally decided not to delay any longer. Extremely vigorous genuine qi surged out of his body and gathered in his palm. The dark golden palm of qi almost covered the entire ceiling array formation as it grabbed at little fatty. Rumble! Even with the Luotian protection, the little fatty was directly knocked over, and the guardian Vajra's illusory figure on the surface of his body disappeared. The attack of a Divine Soul Realm expert was so powerful. The little fatty's face was a little ugly, and he muttered to himself, "It wasn't easy for me to sneak out. Do I have to go back again?" No. Just when the little fatty was in a critical situation, he seemed to sense an obscure sword essence. "Hey brother, help me." A divine thought was quietly transmitted to Yi Guchen's mind in the dark. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.